The heavy, wet snow crunched under our feet as the discordant rhythm of our steps headed toward the western gate of Kettle. Adrian and Constantine were out front and cut down another specter while Castile took its death essence. The dark walls of the city soon shadowed over us, blocking some of the snowfall. Large stones were scattered at the foot of the wall, having fallen with time. Being close to the city felt wrong, and the aged stone was covered in a black mold. The gate was glossy, ominous black wood as we reached it, with one of the large doors slightly ajar, giving a narrow entrance to the city. The company huddled by the wall as Constantine checked the narrow opening in the gate. I was standing in front of Scholar Fabian, who was shivering and did not appear to be doing well. Mavith was standing over the older man, trying to shield him from the wet, heavy snow. The more snow melted on my neck and soaked my clothes underneath, the more I felt the bite of the cold, especially now that we had stopped moving. A specter of an elven woman in guard armor passed through the stone wall and surprised Pavel further back. Pavel screamed in pain as the arm of the specter passed through his torso. The specter flared, its body becoming more coherent as it took something from Pavel's pained wailing. I was the first to get my runic blade on the specter. After 4 rapid strikes, the creature faded into the ground. Castile used the urn to destroy the creature permanently while Linus checked on Pavel. I kneeled opposite Linus, concerned for Pavel. Pavel's face was pale, and he was struggling to breathe. "He will recover as long as more specters do not strike him," Linus told me. He addressed Pavel. "Come on, Pavel, one strike from a specter cannot take down a legionnaire." Pavel struggled to sit up. His breathing was labored. "My lungs feel like cold spikes are stabbing them," he rasped. "Can I have a healing potion?" Castile was standing over us, concern on her face. "It won't do any good. It attacked your life essence, not your physical body. You will recover in a day. Just do not get struck again before then. If the specters drain your life essence, you will become one of them." The wind suddenly seemed to shift, and our minor protection from the wall was gone. Snow was blowing directly into us and getting heavier. Constantine returned from the opening to report. He sounded grave. "Dozens of specters are walking the street, Castile. If everyone had a runic weapon, we might stand a chance." Adrian shook his head. "It is a death sentence if we stay out here. We will freeze and be exposed to whatever creature the summoner sends at us. I prefer to fight inside the city. We can shelter in one of the buildings, and have those with weapons shield the others." Firth dissented. "Easy for you to say. You have a runic weapon." Tension among the men was getting thick. It was the first time the company did not feel cohesive. For some of the men, they were fighting an enemy they could not injure. Constantine offered a solution. "Give everyone one of the runic arrows. Those without a runic sword can hold off the specters long enough with the runic arrowhead for another with a sword to finish it." Silence hung, and the flakes fell. "Do it," Castile finally said. Things were so dire I pulled out one of my aces. "I have this, Firth." I handed him the elven runic dagger I secretly brought from my storage. He seemed like the best person in the company to wield it, someone prone to stab others in the back. "Found it on the elven summoner." Firth unsheathed the dagger in the light of the glowstone. He grunted. "Pretty little poker. Thank you." He sounded mollified and returned the runic arrow Blaze had given him. I got a look from Castile, but she did not say anything. "I want it back after this, Firth." I tried to make eye contact, but he had just waved his hand in acknowledgement. I hope he was not going to hold on to it. The snow was almost knee-deep now, and everyone was shivering but prepared as best we could be. Delmar took the lead through the crack in the gate, and we followed in single file. We fanned out on the other side of the gate. The ruined city lay before us. Skeletons of stone roofless buildings lined the streets. Some had collapsed walls. Specters, as Constantine had noted, walked the streets. They moved effortlessly in the field of snow, leaving it undisturbed as they moved. Delmar was dealing with the nearest one, a young elf male. The specters noticed our arrival and started moving toward us. Castile ordered, "Remain here at the gate until we thin them out. Let them come to us." I moved to the right to face the length of the inner wall. 2 specters in guard uniforms walked through the wall of a nearby building, and I was soon fighting in the deep snow. As I engaged one, the twang of a bow behind me sent an arrow into another. "Blaze, hold your arrows," Delmar said angrily. Blaze's arrow passed through the specter, causing a tiny flash. forcing it back briefly. But it recovered quickly. The arrow shattered on the stone beyond, the arrowhead and splinters disappearing into the snow. Maveth stood behind me with the scholar, but there was not much they could do to help against the incorporeal specters. The only consolation was the slow speed of the specters. They all appeared to be walking toward us. Castile was busy utilizing the urn on the dispelled specters. If she did not pull their death essence into the urn, they reformed from the ground in about 30 minutes. We found that out when Castile missed one of the specters Delmar had dissipated. It reformed under Delmar and struck his leg. Delmar cursed and backed away, and I had to strike the specter down so Castile could use the urn. Delmar was limping and cursing as he handed his sword to Benito, who took his place. Castile was doing her best, but it took almost 15 heartbeats for the violet smoke to be consumed by the urn, and the specters seemed endless. The wind shifted again, and the snow was now falling straight down. The gate and wall had shielded us from the slow, drawn-out combat for hours. The specters were easy enough to deal with one at a time. My shoulder and forearm were starting to fatigue, so I switched hands. My ambidexterity training was coming in useful. "Cursed elemental!" Castile screamed at the sky as the snow was getting deeper. "We need to get inside a building." Fabian. Night had given way to a gray dawn filled with continued snowfall. Fabian was shivering and bundled tight. He looked up, his face blue. The library should be entirely stone and still have its roof. He looked left, right, and then straight. It should be that way. Maybe 100 yards from the outer wall. His teeth were chattering. Eric and Constantine at the front. Castile barked her orders. We were in the best condition of the men wielding the runic weapons. At least, we appeared the least fatigued. Adrian handed his own blade off to another man to get a rest, as did Brutus. I moved to the front and walked with Constantine. Not only did we have to fight the specters, but we also had to break snow, which was thigh-deep now. We had definitely thinned the specters in this part of the city, but it was a city, and if everyone in the city had become a specter, that meant there could be thousands. Many tripping hazards were hidden in the snow, but we pressed forward in a sliding walk. We moved 1 block into the city, and it attracted a wave of 24 specters. We were forced to retreat back to the gate as Constantine and I killed them one by one. I found my air shield did not deter the specters, but Castile's shadow chains could hold them in place and prevented us from being overwhelmed. The problem was Castile needed to constantly utilize the Kettle of Souls, or the specters would reconstitute themselves. We moved forward again once Castile had eradicated the spectral essences. At the intersection of the street, Scholar Fabian shouted, "There it is! That building there!" A vague outline of a building through the dense snow could be seen in the gray morning light. The street had widened as we moved to the building and climbed the steps unmolested. The large front doors were missing, but Fabian had been correct. The building did have a stone roof. I took out my glowstone and entered with Constantine. A specter greeted us, but we dispatched it quickly together. Even in the frigid air, the pungent smell of mold hit me. The antechamber to the library was round and had mosaics on the wall, mostly covered in thick green and black mold. A second and third specter greeted us from deeper inside the structure, as the others moved into the room. While we handled the specters, men gratefully cleared their bodies of snow. "Grab what you can to start a fire," Adrian said, taking back his sword. There was not much in the room besides some dried vines. Constantine had already looked further in. There are a lot of collapsed shelves and moldy books further in. Only noticed 3 specters as well. "We will move deeper then," Castile decided. The shivering company pushed into the next room. It was a massive, high-ceiling room with hundreds of shelves and books. Most of the shelves had been knocked over or just collapsed on themselves with time. The specters Constantine noted were on the far side and seemed uninterested in us at the moment. As soon as we started hacking up the shelves for firewood, the 3 specters moved toward us, and 2 we had not seen. Castile used the Kettle of Souls after we destroyed them. The urn now sounded like it was half full of sand. Castile also looked beyond exhausted. It was not long before we had a fire going. Matteo was warming his hands, his fingertips white with frostbite. He was not the only one with frostbite. Some men had swollen red fingers, pale white skin, or the extremities blackening like Mateo. I finally had time to sit and take off my boots, as my feet had been hurting for hours. Felix took my black blade while I rested. For now, there were no specters. My toes were an angry red, and some skin was peeling. I had been fighting non-stop for hours, which probably saved me from more severe frostbite. I focused my healing spell form on my feet, and the skin flaked off, giving rise to fresh, healthy pink skin. Linus came over and requested I give him all the potions in my dimensional storage. When the skin turned black, it meant the skin was dead and needed to be treated with healing. Don't burn those. A shivering Fabian stood as calm was about to toss some moldy books on the fire. Castile turned at the commotion. Burn the shelves first. If we run out of wood, burn the damaged books first. Fabian nodded in thanks. I could tell he wanted to explore the tomes, but he was still in a miserable state. I was close enough to hear Adrian and Castile talking. I hope we have not just trapped ourselves inside the city. The Kettle of Souls is doing its work, Adrian. We just need to not rush into the city and get overwhelmed, Castile said tiredly. She removed the leather gloves I had given her, and her fingers were completely black. Adrian yelled at her. "Gods, Castile! Why didn't you say anything?" He took her hands, and they tried to warm them. Linus, one of the lesser healing potions for Castile. Linus rushed over and gave it to her, and she drank it with Adrian's help as her fingers were not working. Her black skin slowly regained color. We ended up using half of our stock of potions as we got a large fire going. Men removed their armor and laid out their wet clothes to dry. Specters arrived sporadically from both inside and outside of the complex. They were easily dealt with, and every time we slew one, Castile stood and used the Kettle of Souls on it. The snowfall was not slowing, and by midday it was almost 5 feet deep. At this height, traveling in the city was impossible. Not only would you have to break the snow, but you couldn't see the specters until they were on top of you. Concern was growing, and Flavius said, "The summoner and the specters are not going to be the death of us. He is going to bury us under 10 feet of snow, and we will starve to death." His pronouncement did not help the company's mood, but he was right. Most men had dropped most of their extra food at the tower to lighten their packs. Mavith cheerfully offered up his bag freely. "I have 27 ration bars left." "I would rather starve," Firth said, laughing at Mavith's offer. If things got dire, I was prepared to reveal my additional storage capacity even though I had regretfully just given way to most of my food stores. Delmar tried to be optimistic. "If we can find a dungeon, there should be plenty of meat to harvest inside. I have never been in a dungeon that didn't have something edible in it. How are we going to search for it under 10 feet of snow?" Flavius said bitterly. "I think this city has a sewer system," Scholar Fabian interrupted the growing discontentment of the men. All eyes turned to him as tempers cooled. Most of the great Elven cities had expansive underground networks. I think one of the books Eric has detailed their maintenance. Unfortunately, there were no maps inside. The few of us who realized it turned and looked out at the sea of thousands of books. Most were probably useless, but there had to be a map of the city's underground network somewhere in the mess. We had been in the library for most of the day with the snow not letting up outside. The night was settling outside, and the stained windows of the library were darkening. They were not even real windows, just massive blocks of semi-transparent stone, probably quartz. The fire was burning merrily in the center of the ancient Elven library, constantly supplied by men, breaking apart old bookshelves. Fortunately, everything was dry and burned well with minimal smoke. The specters kept arriving but much slower, one every half hour or so. Castile was confused and spoke aloud, her concerned voice echoing in the large room. Specters should not be able to range so far from where they died. Constantine was inspecting the library's outer wall and answered her, "If you watch them, Castile, they are going about their daily lives until something interrupts their routine. If we had not attacked the first spirit of the girl picking flowers, the others might have left us alone. Well, the non-soldiers, anyway." Castile shook her head while flexing her recently healed frostbitten hands before the fire. "It just concerns me. If all the specters can wander anywhere in the city, then we could be rushed by thousands at once at any time." Scholar Fabian was sitting by the fire going through stacks of books. Benito and Felix were bringing him as the shelves were dismantled. If he thought a book was trash, He put it to his left in the burn pile. If it was useful, he stacked it to his right. He added his input. Specters should take a lot longer to reconstitute after being disrupted by runic weapons. My guess is the ley line underneath the city is feeding them somehow. It is probably a nexus, an intersection of ley lines. It also makes it much more probable there is a dungeon somewhere within the city walls. Another specter entered through the wall, and Adrian moved to deal with it, Constantine quickly supporting him. Castile rose with the urn to permanently end the threat. It was becoming routine now, and everyone felt somewhat safe except for the fact the exit was completely blocked by snow. Castile returned to the fire. There's definitely a nexus under the city. My ether recovery has increased. I had not noticed or felt any difference myself. Constantine walked back to the fire. We should explore the rest of the library. This is just the main room. It was not the first time he had mentioned it in the last few hours. He was smart enough not to wander off on his own without permission. He also had not sheathed his runic weapon the entire time, and was always moving to attack new specters when they wandered in. His runic weapon was the only one that sparked when connecting with the specters. It was like his weapon was taking pleasure in striking the undead. We will wait to see if Scholar Fabian finds anything useful first. Castile replied patiently, the same response she had every time Constantine mentioned exploring. Constantine looked around at the massive room, almost the size of a football pitch. There are tens of thousands of books, Castile. It could take him months to find anything. At least let me see if I can find any access down to the sewer system. So we have the option to move under the city if the summoner sends something after us. We cannot handle, Constantine requested. At least it will not be full of elf shit, Matteo added, getting a laugh. But I shook my head as I knew what Constantine was going to say next. And see, I already have a volunteer to help. Constantine's smirk at Matteo groaning. Delmar had collected everyone's food, inventoried it, and told Castile, we have 4 days of food here. 5 if we stretch it, more if we start rationing now. I agree with Constantine. The sooner we find other exits, the better off we are going to be. Castile relented. In the morning, let's make sure everyone has dry clothes and is rested. Half the men walked around in their underclothes, waiting for the heavier fabrics to dry near the fire. It was a terribly slow process. As the light from the quartz windows faded, I laid down on my bedroll. Half the men had dropped their bedroll at the tower before we ran, so I counted myself lucky. I was mentally exhausted from the lack of sleep and fighting all day. Fighting the specters was like striking training dummies, and I had probably killed over 200 today. If I had not had the healing spell form, I probably would not be able to lift my arm. Brutus couldn't even hold the sword I had lent him. His forearm and shoulder were too sore and cramping. Linus told him he couldn't afford to use a healing potion on him as we were down to just 2 of the lesser healing potions. My bedroll was next to the scholar who was sitting in a chair by the fire. He was exhausted as well, but too excited about paging through the viable tomes, humming and hawing as he went. Maveth was also nearby and not in the mood to play checkers. I closed my eyes but found sleeping difficult. I decided I would not use the amulet or an oblivion pill with danger so close. My survival instincts were telling me not to sleep at all. I heard the other men tossing and turning nearby as well. Maveth shook me awake, the large Goliath standing over me. Eric, it is time for us to be on watch. I sat up and looked around. Somehow I had fallen asleep and didn't even dream. I always dreamed when I slept and could usually recall most of what happened in them usually. I was plagued by nightmares. I thought we were guarding the scholar, I asked groggily. I will be fine. You won't be far away anyway, Scholar Fabian said from his nearby chair, dismissing me. He was intently focused on the book he was paging through and didn't even look up. I stood and looked around. Benito and Delmar were by the entrance, huddled in cloaks. Constantine and Firth had their backs to the fire, facing the open end of the library. Blaze and Dante were hanging by the eastern wall, giving us a total of 6 men on sentry duty. At the fire, Lurkin was heating a large cast-iron cauldron. He looked at me and answered my unasked question. Found it buried under one of the piles of books. Spent 2 hours cleaning it and boiled a few runs of water. He tapped the side. Looks like we were not the only ones to camp in the library. The smith's mark is in Tellian. The 5-gallon cauldron was being used to melt snow and boil water. As I dressed in my armor, I asked Lurkin, "Did you dream last night?" He looked at me perplexed, but went into deep thought. No, not that I can recall, but I usually don't remember my dreams. Why do you ask? Just curiosity. I usually dream, but nothing last night. Not even sure how long I slept, I said casually. Maveth answered me, 4 hours. The watches are 4 hours, according to Delmar, and we are on the second watch. We are to replace Benito and Delmar at the door. Lurkin offered his meal preparation efforts. Have some weak tea, rice, and hard bread. I got my cup from my pack, and the hot tea was welcome for the warmth that spread inside me. The fire might be 6 feet across, but the temperature dropped rapidly once you were more than 10 feet away from it. The allotment was a lot smaller than I had expected. Just a cup of salted, overcooked rice and a slice of stale bread. I still ate it greedily as my stomach was growling with impatience. The food was gone too soon, and I knew every meal would be similar while we were trapped in here. Maveth got a double portion, but it would not be enough to sustain him either. We walked to the entryway, and Benito jumped when I said, "Relief behind you." Benito turned and handed me my sheathed black blade. Delmar poked his head out of his own cloak, his breath forming dense clouds in the frigid air. Things have gotten quiet. Haven't seen a specter in 2 hours, but stay alert. He handed Maveth his blade and went to get some rest. Sharing runic weapons was unusual, but it was necessary with only 5 blades in the company. Firth also had the Elven dagger, and had used it but had not passed it off to anyone. I planned to get it back when we were free of the Elven ruins, if not before. Delmar and Benito gladly went to the fire to get warm, and we pulled our cloaks tight around us. A glowstone lit the chamber beyond. The archway we had entered was now completely blocked by snow, and it was almost 8 feet to the top. Maveth fought with a club, and Delmar's blade looked small in his hand, but he knew the importance of it. We didn't talk for most of the watch as I listened to the snowfall change. Maveth heard it too. It is getting much colder outside. The wet snow is changing to lighter snow, but will accumulate quicker. I just nodded as the cold was still penetrating my cloak. I started to focus on the clouds of my exhaled breaths to pass the time, seeing how far I could send them. Maveth spoke after a time. "I have never seen this much snow before." "It is called a blizzard," I said, using the English word. Blizzard. Maveth tested the word. Sounds ominous and fitting for this circumstance. "Still glad you came with us?" I asked lightheartedly. Maveth gave the question serious thought. Exploring the Elven ruins is thrilling. Being chased by an angry and powerful Elven summoner is not as exciting. I chuckled at his honesty. I reached down and picked up a book. The book crumbled in my hands. I guess these books closer to the entrance had more exposure to the weather, allowing mold to grow on them. Remus and Brutus came to relieve us. Brutus winced as I handed him the black blade. He was still sore from swinging his blade thousands of times yesterday. I had healed my own damaged muscle tissue with my spell form. "Castile wants to talk with you," he said, taking over the duty at the archway. The red-haired Remus took Delmar's blade from Maveth. We left them trying to keep the warmth inside their cloaks. I was not sure why we were guarding the entrance to the room. Castile sat on a bench, paging through a large Elven book, and I sat beside her. Each page was a painting of a magnificent city with elves walking the streets. I waited while she finished, and placed the book down between us. "Constantine is going to explore the rest of the library. He wants you and Matteo to go with him." She spoke softly so no one could hear us. I sighed in a long exhale. "You want me to leave the potions. You are not going with him. Just Matteo is," she said heavily. "I wanted to ask you a question. How much food do you have in your dimensional space? You do not have to take it out, but I need to know." She had spoken softly, and no one was within 20 feet of us. This was it. How much was I going to reveal? I went through it in my mind what I had left. 3 gallons of honey, almost 20 gallons of rum, 30 gallons of water, 15 pounds of salt, 5 pounds of peppercorns, 15 ration bars, and 10 pounds of standard Legion rations. I also had the 2 Elven packs I had yet to search. I slowly said, "Enough for one person for 3 to 4 weeks. Castile nodded, obviously disappointed. I did not have an entire pantry. Things were going to get bad fast as the food ran out. With the snow, we had no way to get more food. She was quiet for a time, and I sensed despair from her. I suggested a course of action. Delmar is right. The only way out is to find the dungeon. The summoner may have buried us under 10 feet of snow, but he cannot spy on us either. If anyone can find a dungeon that has been missing for 1,500 years, it is Constantine. I also suggested, it is frigid by the entrance. Can I suggest we pull those sentries closer to the fire? Castile considered. Her tone changed to confident and authoritative. Constantine, you and Matteo can explore but no more than 4 hours. Adrian tightened the watch closer to the fire and bring the glowstones to Eric to charge them. Matteo was given a bow with 5 runic arrows and no runic blade. Constantine and Matteo then left to explore the library, which I assumed was a large complex. I recharged the glowstones, marking up the perimeter of the camp. Then I joined everyone else, making firewood from the shelves and bringing books for Scholar Fabian to sort. Rice and jerky stew were served as our lunch, and it was an even smaller ration than breakfast. Lurkin was rationing food as directed, and no one was complaining yet, but everyone was realizing what a terrible spot we were in. I do not think Castile made the wrong decision. If we had not entered the city, we would have frozen to death in the snow on the march. After just 2 hours, Constantine returned, running into the chamber with Matteo. I have 10 or more specters right behind us. The men moved quickly to form a wall, and the 4 men with runic blades prepared for the charging specters. Over a dozen specters of children came through the walls in pursuit of Constantine. Firth barked at Constantine as he entered the fight. I knew you were terrible with kids. It didn't get any laughs. Castile was ready with the Kettle of Souls, and the fight did not last long. Constantine was breathing irregularly. Castile was waiting for him to report. Matteo informed us he got struck twice. There may be 5 or 6 more specters, but they must reconstitute themselves. Since Constantine could not speak, Adrian asked Matteo, what did you find? Lots of smaller libraries and studies. A few isolated specters. When we finally found stairs going down, they were not to sewers. It was some type of large shelter complex. One of the rooms had hundreds of elven bones, mostly of children. Only a few of the children chased us, but there were hundreds more, Matteo reported. He also had that look that indicated that he never wanted to work with Constantine again. A look I knew well. Scholar Fabian approached. We should be searching the smaller libraries. This was just a general library. Fascinating books, but the 1,000 books I have looked at so far had nothing useful. Constantine rasped. I think the underground complex extends under the entire city. The civilians took shelter there when the Legion attacked. The poison gas killed everyone above and below ground. Castile. There will be hundreds more specters, but I think we can travel under the city to search for the dungeon. Constantine's voice was exhausted. Constantine nodded his head at Matteo in appreciation of his efforts. Matteo looked unhappy but unsheathed a new thin blade on his hip. They had found another runic weapon, an Elven forged blade. This got murmurs in the company. If we could find more, then everyone could defend themselves. After the scouts returned, the men huddled near the center of the massive library. Constantine and Matteo's news that there were thousands more specters under the city was not being met with much cheerfulness. Matteo's new runic elven blade was being passed around, but I ignored the interest. I shifted my position to listen to Constantine, Castile, Adrian, and Delma talking. They were all circled around the scholar to plan an expedition further into the library. Constantine explained what they had found through ragged, wheezing breaths. The library has 2 large towers on the northern corner of this structure. We only explored one of the towers. Each floor of the tower had its own library. We only encountered a few specters of what I suspect were the Elven librarians. Easily handed, and they reformed after half an hour like the others. He nodded at the Kettle of Souls to indicate it would be required. The scholar eagerly interrupted. What books were in the smaller libraries? Constantine shrugged. Unfortunately, not all were as well preserved as this room. Some weather managed to get through damaged windows. The 3rd and highest floor also has damage to the roof, and the books are just a pile of dirt from centuries in the elements. Scholar Fabian frowned at the news. The 1st and 2nd floors had books in better condition, as well as a number of offices. That is where Matteo found that. He pointed at the Elven blade. It was mounted on a wall in one of the offices. Delmar looked around. We should move camp to one of the offices in the tower. It will be easier to heat and more defensible from the specters. All eyes turned to Castile, but she had yet to make a final decision. What about the underground complex? Constantine continued. After we climbed the tower, we descended and thought we were headed into the sewers, underneath the tower, like the scholar mentioned. But we encountered a long hallway with a number of storage rooms. We only encountered a single specter until we reached a large room littered with hundreds of skeletons, all of them elven children. That is where we drew those specters that were chasing us. Matteo got anxious and swung his new blade even though they were ignoring us. Constantine shook his head. Otherwise, I think the child specters would have continued wandering the room. Delmar was interested in the other rooms. Anything useful in the storage rooms? We didn't explore them too thoroughly, but it is unlikely. I suspect they were full of food and other perishable supplies that have long since expired. All eyes turned to Castile to make the decision. Any sign of vermin? Castile finally asked. Constantine went introspective. I see what you are asking. Rat meat is better than starving, but I suspect the specters keep the city clear of all living things. I saw no signs of rats. He paused before delivering more unwelcome news. We were able to see the city from the 3rd floor of the tower. It is still snowing out there. All you can see is white Castile. Even the hearth tree of the elves is covered. We are trapped. Adrian offered some optimism. We have enough here to burn to keep warm and just need to melt the snow for fresh water. Delmar dissented. We will run out of food, Adrian. Maybe we can stretch it and let it last a month. But I doubt we are going to find anything in the city that has not spoiled or turned to dust long ago. Our only hope is we find the scholar's dungeon and hunt there. Agreed, Castile said tersely before an argument erupted. We will clear the 2 library towers of specters and see if their libraries offer any more clues to its whereabouts. From his seat, Scholar Fabian was quick to add, Elven libraries in the Eisenheim Kingdom have special restricted sections for magical study. Maybe one of the tower libraries is a study of the dungeon itself. It would make sense if the dungeon is indeed inside the city. There was slight optimism as the leadership group separated and began to move our camp to the north end of the library, closer to the towers. The decision was made for Constantine, Adrian, Blaze, and I to go with Castile to secure one of the towers. The scholar would come with us. Brutus, Matteo, Delmar, Flavius, and Pascal would remain with the larger group, protecting them with their runic weapons. There was not much fanfare as we entered the doors on the north end of the library. I somehow ended up in front with a glowstone in one hand and my black blade in the other. A shield would be useless in this situation, as it wouldn't stop the specters anyway. The wide corridor had footprints from Constantine and Matteo in a thin layer of dust. The walls were painted with images, but the dust coating them was too thick to make them out clearly. "Follow our prince," Constantine said impatiently from the left. "There will be a wide stairway to the left in about 50 feet. I walked slowly, as our footfalls were muffled by the thick dust layer. I paused at the steps Constantine had informed me about. The stone steps were a rich beige stone, and had much less dust. I started to climb the wide circular staircase. The extremely cold air had not reached freezing temperatures yet, and our ascent's echoes made me tense as I was a dozen steps ahead of the group. I reached the first landing, and 2 large double doors hung loosely from broken hinges. They were also covered in dust. Whatever had ripped them out had done so a long time ago. I entered the room beyond, and a spectre was placing a book on a shelf, oblivious to my presence. Castile hissed, "It is a poltergeist. Watch out, as it can affect the material plane. Adrian was on my right, Eric, you and me now." We both advanced on the translucent elf in robes. It turned its head in curiosity at us before Constantine's blade stabbed forward from my left and took it in the chest, causing a flash of sparks. It screamed in silence as Adrian hacked it from my right and I finished it off, bringing my blade down on its head. Constantine chuckled. "Third time I have killed this one. Hopefully, this time it stays dead." Constantine must have rushed forward to attack the spectre. I quickly glanced at his runic blade, and it had a luster to it that I had not noticed before. Constantine confidently sheathed the blade. That was the only one on this floor when we explored. Castile had the kettle out, and the violet death essence smoke was already being sucked into it. Castile was not happy, Constantine. You didn't mention any poltergeists. He looked blankly at Castile. They are advanced forms of specters that can manipulate objects. They are usually only capable of throwing objects and not wielding them like weapons. This one must have been immensely powerful to handle that deteriorating book so gently. Constantine nodded, accepting his failure. I didn't know that. There is another one on the 3rd floor. When I struck it down, it was trying to repair the damaged books. I took in the room as Scholar Fabian was itching to get at the shelves. There was only a single transparent stone window, helping our glowstones light the room. The room was surprisingly clean and orderly. The poltergeist must have maintained this room through the centuries. 6 long, double-sided shelves dominated the room. Simple but elegant desks lined the walls, with 5 doorways dispersed between them. Those of us with runic weapons walked the small library and searched the doors. Adrian found a spectre in one of the rooms and quickly dispatched it for Castile to consume with the urn, much to Constantine's chagrin from claiming there were no more specters on this floor. We were allowed a break when the entire floor was secure, and Fabian started to go through the shelves in earnest. I went into one of the offices that had a fireplace and window. The view through the stone was foggy, and I cleaned the inside as best I could. Beyond that, it looked like the snow was slowing, as I could see a good distance and see what looked like the shapes of buildings in the city. The massive tree that dominated the city was covered in snow, its massive branches sagging under the weight. Blue lightning flashed in the sky high above as I watched. I heard Castile walk up behind me. Storm elementals, she pointed out to the blue flashes. Looks like the summoner's control over them is waning at the moment. Are we getting out of this? I asked softly. This felt like Maka all over again, trapped in a city. She tapped the kettle of souls in her arms. Yes. With this, we stand a chance. Why hasn't someone used that before to clear the city of the undead? There appears to be a lot in this city that can be plundered, I asked. Castile looked out the window with me at the sky. The first kettle of souls was found in a dungeon about 900 years ago, according to Scholar Fabian. There was not much use for it until they learned the death essence it crystallized could be used to forge runic weapons and certain potions. The Telhian Empire has neither powerful runic smiths nor powerful alchemists to make use of it. This kettle was sitting in the vault of a count, long forgotten, but Scholar Fabian was aware of its existence. We were lucky the count was willing to part with it for a favor. Favor? I asked. That is, between the Duchess Veronica and Count Lorenzo. He did not know the true value of this artifact. Neither did I. Castile left my side, walked the room, checked the fireplace, an ornate blackwood desk. She searched the drawers and pulled out a small silvery knife that looked like a letter opener. She talked while she searched the rest of the desk. We are going to clear the upper 2 floors. You are to remain here and guard Scholar Fabian while he sorts the books. Castile did not find anything else interesting, so she secured the small knife on her person and left the room. I sat at the desk and ran my hands along it. It was a beautiful blackwood desk that had survived centuries, but if the company moved up to these floors, it was going to be smashed and burned in the fireplace. I sighed and went to the library area. Scholar Fabian was excitedly reading the spines among the shelves. Castile, Adrian, Constantine, and Blaze were departing to head further up the tower. I went and stood next to the scholar. Any luck? Luck? Scholar Fabian said absently. He replaced a book. Unfortunately, these appear to be all advanced reference manuals for professions. A lot of terminology used is even beyond my understanding. Interesting, they sound valuable. What professions are here? I asked, trying to make conversation while we waited. Valuable, if you can read Elvish. Maybe if they were translated and transcribed, but my grasp of the finer points of the language is lacking. Let me see. He started to walk the shelves looking at the spines. This section here is for weavers. This section over here, he paused to read a title, appears to be for cooking and brewing. He spent some time on the next shelf reading titles before announcing, it appears to be furniture making. It includes everything from cutting the tree to seasoning the wood to various techniques. He had covered most of the sections and came to the last full row. This appears to be the herbalism section and apothecary section. Alchemy? I have learned a little bit from Decimus, I said excitedly. Not alchemy. He shook his head. just basic herbalism, and non-ether-infused brews for an apothecary. I was still interested, and he indicated maybe 300 large tomes on the shelf. Of course, they were all in Elvish. I started paging through the first book on the shelf. It had a lot of pictures and text. Seeing me enthralled, Scholar Fabian returned to his own task of trying to find clues for the shimmering labyrinth. I was paging through my 5th book when he said, "There might be an alchemy section in a different library, or wherever the Mage College is located." It took me 15 years to learn the nuances of the written Elven language. Scholar Fabian started to go into his diatribe about how he became an expert on the Elven language, and I half listened as I focused on slowly turning the pages. If I couldn't move these books to my dimensional space, I would try adding as many as possible to my dreamscape. It was over 4 hours before the group returned from the upper floors. I had paged through about 1/3 of the books before my eyes started hurting. "How did it go?" I asked the group. Adrian answered tiredly, 7 specters and 4 poltergeists. There is nothing useful on the 3rd floor. Part of the roof collapsed and weathered everything. All the books were mush. The 2nd floor just had a crack in the window, but mold got to apportion the books. Fabian eagerly stood, ready to explore upstairs despite his bloodshot eyes. Castile stopped him. "Later, Scholar. I want to get the company settled up here first. What did you find in these books?" Scholar Fabian eagerly told Castile. "It appears to be a catalogue for the Elven master craftsman. I assume the other smaller libraries are the same, focusing on 5 or 6 professions on each floor. There is invaluable knowledge contained within. The Collegium Scholarium would be extremely excited to get this collection." Castile took in all the books but shook her head. "Getting them all out of here will be too much of a task. What about the shimmering labyrinth?" Scholar Fabian had a smile split his face. 3 references so far. One is very promising. He opened a book he had put aside and started reading. "The rock spider silk spinnerets are viable for 7 hours after harvest. Getting them to the weavers on Dawn's Light Street directly from the labyrinth is best to spin them into silk thread immediately." His smile grew. "Dawn's Light Street is in the city." "So, the dungeon is within 7 hours of the city," Adrian said unhappily. "It does not mean it is within the walls or accessible by the underground network." Castile gave him a harsh look. It was not like Adrian to voice his pessimism. It was not the first time since being trapped in the city. Castile barked. "Adrian and Constantine with me. We will go and escort the rest of the company up here." As they were leaving, I heard Castile voicing her displeasure at his attitude and how it would affect the rest of the company. Blaze went and sat by a window and looked out at the white expanse, slowly darkening with night. He seemed morose, and was normally one of the cheerier men in the company. I was beginning to think this undead city was affecting people. I remembered that last night I didn't dream. Maveth had also been extremely quiet since entering the city and didn't want to play checkers. Yes, this city was definitely affecting us somehow. Castile returned with the others over an hour later. 3 specters had stumbled into the large library while we were gone, and the company had been killing them repeatedly as they reconstituted, waiting for Castile to return with the Kettle of Souls. As the company arrived, Adrian used the 5 offices and set them up as small bunk rooms. There were 25 of us if you included Maveth, Castile, and Scholar Fabian. I was rooming with Maveth, Constantine, Matteo, Felix, and Scholar Fabian in the largest office. Our job was to protect the scholar while he worked through the books. Every office in the small library had a fireplace, but we were warned only to burn enough to fight off the chill. The firewood was being hauled up from the collapsed shelves of the main library in shifts. As we set up our room, Fabian paged through the single shelf of books in the office. Half of them fell apart at the spine as he flipped through them. I claimed the only desk in the room to sleep on. This desk was made of the same black wood as the other desk, but was much larger. I guessed this office belonged to the chief librarian of this tower. Felix scoffed from his position near the fire at me setting up my bedroll. Wish I had thought of that. This stone floor sucks the heat right out of you. I ignored him. Anything interesting? I asked Scholar Fabian as I sat in the chair at my beddesk and went through the drawers. He didn't answer as he paged through his most current book and replaced it on the shelf with a huff. Mostly administrative books. One is a log of books to be copied and loaned out to requested parties. I think other ancient elven libraries, but I am not sure. The titles listed are interesting anyway. It would really be useful if I had an elf fluent in the language here to help." He didn't say more as he lay down exhausted on his own bedroll near the small fire Felix was starting. I found a lot of paper in the desk that crumbled to dust when I tried to move it. I sifted through the dust and found what looked to be a bag of shiny steel marbles. The bag was brittle and cracked as I took out the 7 marbles. I rolled them in my hand, and they had a good weight to them. They were perfect spheres, maybe ball bearings of some kind, or I thought they might go to some game the elves played, or possibly ammunition for a sling. I left them on my bedroll in front of me as I meticulously searched the rest of the desk. The only other thing of interest was a dozen vials with murky black liquid. They were obviously potions that had not deteriorated over time. The elvish writing on the vials had faded entirely with the centuries. The room was filling with light blue smoke as Felix's fire started to get going. It was a more confining space than the massive open library, and the small amount of smoke was building up. "Open the flue!" Constantine barked as he entered the room. He went to the fireplace himself and operated a small stubborn crank. It groaned, and we found it had been a mistake to use it as centuries of dust in the chimney vent crashed into the fire. The fire went out, and the room filled with dust. Everything and everyone was coated, and no one looked happy. Shuller Fabian started coughing, angry eyes tearing as the smoke and dust filled the small space, trained on Constantine. To me, it felt like an unnatural anger. I started laughing, a loud, boisterous laugh. "Damn it, Constantine. I can't believe the all-knowing legionnaire didn't realize there were 1,500 years of dust in there. You are never going to live this one down." I was trying to cut the tension, and finally, Mavaith coughed hoarsely and started laughing too, taking my lead. Constantine finally joined the laughter, and it was awkward to see him jovial. "You are right. I will shake out everyone's gear. We should see if that window opens." He spent some time, but the block of clear stone had no hinges or method to remove it. While Constantine was cleaning the room, we made 2 trips for firewood from the primary library while the dust settled. That night, as we all ate an insignificant dinner, as I studied everyone in the company, it was clear they were depressed. It was hard to tell if it was linked to our circumstances, or if the ruins were doing something to them. I was leaning toward the latter. That night I was tempted to use my dreamscape amulet. I asked Nevaeth to sleep close and remove it if necessary. I also only planned to be inside the dreamscape for 2 4-hour sessions. In the dreamscape, I added 10 of the Elven books on herbalism to my secret shelves. That was as much backlash as I thought I could handle when I left. I was not concerned with practicing with the men in the Ankeg room. Instead, I went to the shelf and pulled off the compendium of spell forms for the displacement affinity. Displacement magic was used to run the massive teleport gates in the city. Displacement mages were highly sought after, and with my 61 affinity, I thought I might be able to imprint the spell form for their ability. I opened it to the index. It was remarkably similar to the Time spell form compendium. There were 4 suggested spell forms at 3 different power levels. I was happy to see that with my 61 affinity, only 2 of the major spell forms were not available to me. I skipped the spell forms beyond my affinity, so I wouldn't know what I was missing out on. I spent all 4 hours I had allotted figuring out the Portal Gate spell form. Create Portal Gate also required the anchor, and connect Portal Gate's spell forms to create the portal gates that the Empire used in the larger cities. There was more to the process as the gates themselves had to be artificed to create a permanent weave to feed aether from ley lines, which was then activated by a displacement mage with the Connect Portal Gate spell form, or the actual spell. It allowed me to cross off Anchor, connect Portal Gate, and create portal gates off my list. With the ability to cast actual spells being so rare, I could see why they had these spell forms in this book for Tellian mages. The thing was, I did not see myself spending the rest of my life making portals for the Empire. I exited the dreamscape to the room's chilly air. Even with a fire burning, my head was pounding from adding the books, and I couldn't imagine doing that 29 more times just to get all the herbalism and apothecary books into the dreamscape amulet. I even questioned their value as I couldn't read Elvish. I focused on the room around me, stilling my breathing. Mavith was breathing loudly in his sleep, and Matteo was snoring softly. The scholar, I was happy to hear, was also sleeping. He had been too excited by the massive amount of Elven knowledge we had encountered. I let my headache fade before returning to the dreamscape. I started to review the simplest of spell forms. Quick Step, also referred to as flash step. It was a very short-range teleport that was always the same distance in the direction you were facing. The distance was dependent on your affinity for displacement magic. With a 10 affinity, that distance was just under 5 feet, according to the text. I started to do the math to see what my 61 affinity would get me. The answer was about 171 feet. Utterly useless unless I was trying to run away, so maybe not that useless. The good thing about this spell form was you could not materialize inside objects. It shortened the distance until there was space to complete the teleport, and if you didn't teleport, your ether was still expended. I looked at the ether requirements and swore, "Fuck." Oscar jumped and went on alert at my foul language, barking and looking for the problem. I started laughing at the absurdity of someone invading the dreamscape. Quick step only moved the mage and not their possessions. How was it even remotely useful? Okay, I had misread the text. The mass of the mage's equipment would add to the base ether cost for the quick step ability. You could also not take anyone else with you when you flashed forward due to their ether resistance. I did not find this spell form appealing. The summon object spell form did appear much more useful. This spell form brought an object to you. The distance and mass determined the amount of ether. The object had to also be within the mage's line of sight. It was an extremely useful combat ability for disarming foes. The problem was the orientation of the object was fixed. So, I would be summoning a sword pointed at me. I read a little more on the spell form. It was useful in evading arrows as the arrows were light, and all inertia was halted when an object was summoned. But once again, the ether cost seemed prohibitive to me. I moved on to the next spell form, hoping it was a better option for me. It required at least an affinity of 25, so it had to be more useful. Ethereal body allowed the mage to push himself into the astral plane. This meant my afterimage would be immune to damage. Well, runic weapons and etheric magic spells could hit creatures in the astral plane. We were doing that with the specters, so this was not an invulnerability spell. The blink spell form was a more advanced form of the quickstep spell form. This spell form functions the same way, but lets you control the distance you travel. It only required a 30 affinity to learn, so I moved on to the next spell form, Dimensional Door. The Dimension Door was a very impressive spell form that required 2 castings. The first casting was the anchor used on any doorway. The second casting was also cast on a doorway and connected to the first. As long as the mage sustained the connection, people could pass through from one doorway to the other. There was no restriction on distance. However, once the mage dropped the connection, both anchors faded and would need to be reset. The limiting factor for me came down to the distance the doors were apart, which determined how much aether would be required per second. I just did not have a large ether pool. Send object could teleport any non-living object to a place with which the mage was familiar. The mass and distance determined how much aether was required. I couldn't even cast the higher affinity spells once, so teleport other, plane shift, and greater teleport were off the table for me. I was having enough trouble on this plane of existence anyway. Not being able to learn greater teleport was a disappointment. This spell allowed you to send your mind to a location and pull your body there. The cost in ether was immense. Maybe there were more spell forms options out there. If these were my only choices, then it would either have to be Blink or Dimension Door. I started thinking maybe Dimension Door would be a good way to escape a terrible situation. I certainly wish I had it at this moment. I returned from the dreamscape. I sat up, my back aching from the hard surface. I wished I had pulled out my pillow. The window had the gray of the morning light shining through, and Constantine was sitting there looking out the window. It was just the two of us awake. He slowly turned to me. The snow has stopped. But I do not think we are done with the elementals. Why? What is going on out there? I asked, moving to the window, and almost tripping on Mavis. I reached the window and the blue flashes in the sky were still there, but Constantine was right. The sky was clear, and just an ocean of white was out there. They are dropping the temperature. I have been scraping frost off this window for the last 2 hours. We were not planning to go outside anyway, I responded while noticing a huge amount of snowdrop from the massive hearth tree in the distance. A giant eagle took flight and circled into the sky. It quickly returned to the tree. not daring to approach the elemental lightning. "Those eagles are going to freeze to death," Constantine nodded out the window. "They might be our best chance of food if we can get to them." "Breakfast," came a call from the central room. The entire small library instantly came alive as men felt the start of the hunger pains. I went with Constantine to find a thick soup for breakfast. Lurkin smiled, mashed up the stale bread and used a little extra jerky this morning in the soup. "Don't tell Delmar." His request was moot as Delmar was behind him and just rolled his eyes. I guessed that Delmar had told him to use what he did this morning. The starchy soup had pea-sized pieces of rehydrated jerky in it, but Lurkin made sure to scoop from the bottom for everyone. So they got the sediment. My protesting stomach thought it was one of the best things I'd ever eaten. The air felt colder, but the 5 side rooms all had small fires, making the central room bearable. Delmar spoke after everyone arrived. "We are all going to remove our armor. Armor is not much use against the specters anyway, and it should help you bundle your cloaks tighter to your body. If you have spare clothes, layer them. Castile is going to lead an expedition to the other tower this morning. Matteo, Blaze, Brutus, and I will thin out the specters there with Castile." After Castile left, my job was to guard the men who were gathering firewood from the shelves in the primary library to haul up to our rooms. Adrian was supervising, making the floor of the tower we now occupied more hospitable. He had groups taking what they could from the upper floors. I think most of us realized it was busy work to keep our minds off our predicament. I was on my 5th trip with firewood when Castile's group joined us, climbing the stairs. Maveth was carrying a large bundle of wood and was not afraid to ask, "What did you find in the other tower?" Delmar answered for Castile. 6 specters. The roof completely collapsed, and there was nothing to salvage on any of the floors. "All the books have long since been destroyed by weathering," Castile said steely. "We will start thinning the specters under the city. It will take time, but as long as we have the kettle, we can clear them all." As we climbed, she reassured everyone around her. "Scholar Fabian will find out where the dungeon is located soon, and we can seek refuge there." We all started to get accustomed to the persistent cold as it became the new normal. We sealed the doors to the small library as best we could to keep in the heat, and kept the 5 fires going in the offices. Part of my assigned duties were to watch over Scholar Fabian as he paged through the hundreds of books. I also finished going through the entire herbalism and apothecary section. Each night, I added another 10 books to my Dreamscape collection, and I was getting better at handling the migraines on exiting. Perhaps I was building a tolerance. They were fading much quicker, at least. I also made trips with Maveth to the floors above to search for viable books in the mess above, which was once a small library for Fabian to look at. The 3rd floor still had its doors intact, but a rafter in the roof had fallen, exposing a portion of the room to the elements. The room was half filled with snow. No tomes remained other than some tarnished silver book bindings. We stacked those dozens of blackened silver plates together. If we escaped the city, maybe we would pack them outer they might find their way into my storage. The 2nd floor held more promise. The shelves had collapsed, and one of the quartz windows had buckled, leaving a wide crack. It gave me access to see how cold it really was outside. Sticking my hand through the crack, I found it colder than anything I had ever experienced before in this life or my last, and my hand was prickled with needles of pain immediately from the cold. Maveth commented after replicating my act. "We wouldn't last an hour outside. The summoner doesn't need to send any creatures after us in order to finish us off." I tried to cheer up the morose Goliath. "The summoner cannot hold back spring." I handed him a ration bar from my storage. "Eat this, Maveth. You are looking a little thin." The truth was all of us were thinning rapidly after just 4 days in the city on the forced diet. Maveth more so, even though he was getting twice as much as everyone else at meals. He looked at the bar uncertainly. "I have a few more in my storage. Eat it. It is fine, and just don't tell anyone." His hand slowly extended to take it, his hunger winning out. Maveth had trouble with lying, but I thought he would keep this secret. He snapped it in half and tried to hand me the other half. So far I had been suffering with the others, not eating from my dimensional space. It had been difficult to overcome the urges, and I knew if I started, I wouldn't stop. Looking at the bar, my mouth watered. No, Mevieth, it is all for you. I turned my back on him, resisting the temptation, and continued searching the second floor. As I dug through the debris, I heard him slowly crunching away guiltily on the ration bar. These upper floors held no offices to search as they only held shelving. We dug through the mess and stacked books to be brought downstairs for Scholar Fabian to review. According to the scholar, the second floor appeared to focus on all types of metal smithing, from household goods to armor and weapons. There were lots of techniques with instructions and images by Elven master smiths within the pages. Of course, it was all in Elvish and useless in our current circumstances. No one in the company was foolish enough not to think these books would be worth thousands of gold if recovered. The problem was recovering them. After I had paged through the herbalism and apothecary collection, I started helping Scholar Fabian sort the books. He had resumed teaching me the Elven language. It was a lot easier to speak the language than it was to read it. This was made doubly so by the fatigue from slowly starving my body. My mind did not want to focus for more than a few minutes at a time. I was finding myself staring out blankly at nothing. I had no idea how the scholar kept going so strong hour after hour, but I guessed his thirst for knowledge outweighed his hunger pains and mental fatigue. I did make progress on the Elven language, though, as I cheated. I spent 4 hours in the Dreamscape amulet every evening, working on reading, writing, and speaking the Elven tongue. So far, no one had requested to use the artifact. I was most surprised that Matteo had not made another request. During my nights, I added 10 books, and then tried to sort the ones I had as I worked on my steady mastery of the language. Having a copy of Scholar Fabian with me in the Dreamscape made the process even easier. Creating a copy of him allowed the amulet to draw on the short daily lessons he taught me during the day, making progress faster with each day that passed. Learning inside the amulet was also much more effective than in the real world. I found that recall for knowledge was much clearer from studying the books, and my muscle memory from weapons practice was much sharper and more efficient, helping to reduce wasted movement during sparring practice in and out of the Dreamscape. My best guess was the amulet focused all my efforts on learning the current task. I could see why these amulets were so valued, if using them allowed me to progress so much faster than without one. Scholar Fabian thought that with my rapid improvement, I should become a master linguist rather than a soldier. The funny part of all this was I could not speak Tsinga, my alleged native language. None of the books I had gave me insights into that language, though. On the 5th morning in the tower, I noticed that only Constantine and I seemed well rested when I woke up. Everyone else was lethargic and took more time to wake up and get active. I used the amulet, and Constantine had a spell form to shorten the rest he needed. I planned to tell Castile my suspicions and observations. I spent that night cleaning up the space in the amulet, after I added more books and a bit of language practice. I moved everyone and everything to the Scorpion room, walled it off, and reset all the monster rooms. I felt some guilt locking Oscar with the constructs, so I altered their disposition to play with him. I was never part of Castile's small group that went every morning to the underground complex to kill specters. I did hear stories of how they would spend time trying to attract the attention of only a few at a time. Then they would lure them back toward our tower and slay them with runic weapons, and Castile would use the Kettle of Souls to end them permanently. When they returned this evening, the group was missing a person. I could read the faces of everyone. Someone had died. I tried to recall who went with them this morning. Constantine stood in the doorway, his face blank. Castile went into the room she slept in and closed the door. Delmar gathered everyone around. Men, come close. I don't want to repeat myself. His voice was heavy. Delmar's face was thin, and his eyes were sunken and dark. He waited as a group was coming back from gathering wood. With everyone present, we listened to him. We encountered a Wight. A lot of confused looks, had him explain. It is a powerful type of undead zombie. We were surprised and it got Lysander. Castile was able to restrain it subsequently, but Lysander is dead. There was a quiet shock. Lysander was one of the youngest men in the company. Not even 21 if I remembered. He was also a terrible cook, but no one made a joke about it now. Firth asked the most pertinent question. Are there more of them? The Wights? Constantine answered, more than likely. We entered a different part of the underground complex. It was a barracks or refuge for important citizens. It had a slew of specters and poltergeists. We had drawn out 5 of them and the Wight as well. Lysander was paralyzed as it stabbed him and then bit into his neck, ripping out his throat. Constantine handed Brutus the sword that I had loaned him at the beginning of this mess, as he lent it to Lysander this morning for use. Constantine walked into the room. We cannot become complacent. This undead city most likely has more surprises. He placed a new elven short blade on the table Scholar Fabian worked at, its thin blade about 1 meter in length, which grew wider toward the end with only a slight curve. Lysander fought well. Remember him well. Delmar broke into Constantine's speech with a flat tone. There is some more good news. We found a storeroom full of elven wine. If it is not vinegar, we will have it with our meals. Even the promise of alcohol did not break the somber faces. 21 legionnaires were left, not including Maveth, the scholar, and Castile. Delmar gave Lurkin 2 bottles from his pack and went to join Castile. Adrian followed him, but had not been part of this expedition to the underground complex. I knocked on the door shortly after it had closed. Castile's sharp voice answered, "Enter!" I walked in, and the 3 of them looked at me expectantly. I told them my thoughts. I think everyone is being prevented from dreaming and recovering mentally when they sleep. Delmar responded hotly. Everyone is sleeping just fine, Eric. Castile held up her hand to stop Delmar. Explain, Legionnaire. I gathered my thoughts. I have noticed everyone is more lethargic, irritable, and quick to anger with shorter tempers. I have had to calm more than a few men down. I have been using my dreamscape amulet nightly, and Constantine has his spell form to help him sleep and recover quicker. We appear to be the only 2 acting normal. Delmar harumphed and said dismissively, "Normal. We are eating 1/4 of what we should be eating. Most of the men are making a new notch in their belt every day." Adrian finally said something. I agree with Eric. We have been in more dire situations before. The men seem to have given up too quickly and easily. Castile nodded as well. I think Eric is right too. We should confirm it by having others use the amulet. She looked me in the eye. With your permission. I had known this was going to be the outcome. I think it is necessary. 2 people can enter at once. Perhaps more. I have never attempted it. They just both need to be touching the amulet. Castile nodded slowly. Tonight, then. I will use it with you here, and Adrian and Delmar can stand watch. I left the room feeling slightly awkward, but I knew that it was the right thing to do and had to be done. Maybe the men were being blocked from just getting a deep sleep, but I felt it was more. Maybe there was some type of slow festering corruption or curse surrounding the city. A few hours later I was on the floor in front of the fire with Castile on the bedrolls. The plan was to stay in the dreamscape for 6 hours and see if it was effective for Castile. I suspected it would be. Delmar was currently on watch in the outer room. I will channel Aether and enter first, I told Castile, who nodded. Adrian was seated watching intently as my consciousness left to enter the dreamscape. I was in the entry room of the dungeon. Castile appeared a moment later. She turned around slowly. The dungeon. I nodded. The others using it will figure out where you got the amulet if this is the space you created. I didn't create it. It was like this the first time I entered, and I can't change it, I said while creating a table and chairs and taking a seat, offering a seat to Castile with an extended hand. Castile stepped back, surprised, before relaxing. She sat opposite of me. How does it work? I just think what I want, and it creates it, I explained while filling the table with a Thanksgiving feast. I know it is not going to give your body any sustenance, but it still tastes good. Castile took the mashed potatoes and cranberry relish. She tried the relish first and spit it out. Sour, I laughed. It is tart, not sour. It has sugar, but you need to get past the tartness. Give it a chance, I said, and she tried it again and nodded slowly. What is it? She asked, trying the mashed potatoes, which were much more to her liking. Cranberries from the south, I replied. I watched her as she ate. She tried a little of everything before stopping. You are right. I think the cursed souls in the city are affecting us. Because there are so many specters, they are creating an aura. Castile moved the food around on her plate, not making eye contact. I questioned Castile. But you have made progress in the underground complex. The more specters you kill, the less the evil aura. Castile couldn't hide a pained look. It is much larger than we thought. There are 2 levels. and even a sewer system underneath those levels. Constantine thinks it was built by their Earth mages to hide the citizens. When the Legion attacked the city, the Legion never entered the city, instead filling it with a powerful and deadly gas that seeped into the underground city complex. "So, you have made no progress?" I asked, confused. "We kill more than 100 specters and poltergeists a day. We learned the undead are not tied to their body, but to the city itself. It means they can all wander anywhere in the city. And now that we encountered a Wight, Wights are powerful undead, and there could be wraiths, or maybe even banshees," Castile admitted. "Was the wraith we encountered heading to Sobril from these elven ruins?" I said, remembering that terrible night. Castile recalled the encounter. It was definitely an elf in a past life, but it was more interested in Constantine's runic weapon. "Some undead have connections to certain objects from their past life." She trailed off, not talking further about it, and focused on eating. After she had stuffed her face for a time, I offered with an uncomfortable smile, "Do you want to fight any monsters?" We walked into the Ankeg chamber but didn't fight them. Instead, Castile practiced manifesting objects and creatures. She was able to do it, successfully creating gnolls. But it took much more of an effort for her than for me. She was the second person to enter the dreamscape, so I think it was harder for her to make changes. And I voiced my opinion. Castile offered a guess. "I know at the Mage College, only 2 people use them at a time. My speculation is any more would overload the amulet. The first person in the dreamscape amulet also has primary control of the environment. Even though I tried to stop you, you could make the gnolls I created disappear." I was happy to finally be learning more about how the amulet functioned. I had another question that I wanted answered. Could I get others to create books here with their knowledge? And would those books remain after they exited the dreamscape? I smiled encouragingly at Castile. "You can create books that you have read before. Try it." Castile arched an eyebrow at my sudden eagerness but focused, and a thick tome appeared in her hand. It was a spell book. She slowly opened it up, and her eyes got wider and wider as she rapidly paged through it. "It's the complete book. I read this a long time ago at the Mage College. I learned shadow chains from it." She was in disbelief. "It looks the same. Even the page where I left a drink to hold it open has the watermark." Castile's thoughts were spinning. "What are you thinking?" I asked her. "There are dozens of spell books I looked at. There were spells I couldn't learn at the time that were too complex. I thought I would never have the opportunity to," Castile said excitedly, as she continued paging through the book. "I created a shelf in the entry room for her, and she studied for the last few hours while I practiced fighting her manifestations of gnolls." When we exited the dreamscape, Castile moaned in pain and held her head, sitting up too quickly. She rolled over and dry heaved a few times. "I should have warned you, Castile. The more things you create in there for the first time, the more it taxes your mind. How many books did you recreate?" Castile continued to dry heave for a minute. Adrian was handing her a canteen of water. She laughed harshly. "Almost all of them. 30, maybe 31. Every spell book I read at the Mage College." She took the canteen and pushed Adrian back. "I am fine. Just some nausea and a headache." Adrian gave me a harsh look as he helped Castile stand. Castile wobbled on her feet, suffering from a bout of vertigo, and it reminded me of the first time I had overextended myself in the dreamscape. "I don't think we will find out if it protected you from the undead city's aura," I said, while returning the amulet to my storage. Castile regained herself. "No, it did. Even with the aftermath, I can tell. My either core is easier to access, and my thoughts are clearer." Adrian looked a little skeptical. "Are you sure? You look much worse than before you used it." "I'm sure," Castile said firmly. "Do we have the whole company use it then?" Delmar asked from the doorway, clearly agitated. Castile looked at me, and I nodded. "Well, I will go now then." Delmar moved and lay down next to me. I felt slightly uncomfortable but produced the amulet and entered the dreamscape. The last book Castile had been reading was still here. She must have made the others disappear rather than put them on the shelf I made for her. I tried to manifest the books she had created, but none appeared. That was disappointing. The 3 gnolls she had created were still here. I made one of them vanish and made it reappear a minute later. So, if she left creations behind, I could control them. I was thinking about this when I finally wondered where Delmar was. I waited a few more minutes before exiting the dreamscape. The three of them watched me as I got off the ground. It didn't work, Castile said. What didn't work? I said, confused. You have to be able to send your own ether into the amulet to activate it. My ether didn't work for Delmar, she clarified. I let out a chuckle, and Delmar's face contorted into masked fury. He was ready to throttle me. I was chuckling that I had not lied to Mateo. Not Delmar's inability to manipulate either. Delmar didn't see it that way. He thought I was laughing at him. He didn't give me a chance to explain. An irate Delmar ordered me out. Go back to your room, Eric. I left the three of them as they started to discuss what we had learned and to plan a course of action. I returned to my room, stirred the coals in the fireplace, and added some boards to liven up the fire. Once the fire was going again, I lay out on the black desk. Maevith stirred. Eric, is everything all right? He tried to whisper, but his baritone was still fairly loud. Yeah, Castile just used the amulet tonight. I thought for a moment. Maevith, you have a spell form, right? Can you direct the ether in your core? I whispered. My spell form is weak. I can turn rock into clay for a brief time before it turns back to rock. But yes, I have enough awareness of my ether core to manipulate the ether, he grumbled out in a softer voice. Aware of how loud he was, I produced the amulet. Maevith, I am going to enter the dreamscape amulet first. You can touch it and channel ether into it after, I offered. I am not interested in using your amulet, Maevith replied. Felix stirred and mumbled something about us being quieter. Just trust me, Maevith. The city is doing something to us, and this will counter it, I said pleadingly. All right, he said after a pause. Maevith appeared in the dungeon entry room shortly after me. He immediately started spinning about, curious. He then looked at his hands and flexed them. Everything looks so real, he said in awe. His voice was back to his normal intrusive volume. I started to explain. The city is preventing us from dreaming. So even though everyone is sleeping, they are not getting any mental recovery. This amulet space allows you to dream because it is a dreamscape. My explanation sounded lame, but Maevith nodded like it made complete sense. I did the same thing I did for Castile and created a spread of food on the table. It is not real, but still tastes good. I motioned for him to help himself. Maevith was too wide for the chair, so I created a bench for him, and he jumped when it appeared under him. I laughed. Maevith, it is just a bench. You can create anything or anyone you ever knew here. However, you might suffer a slight headache when you leave, depending on how many things you create. Or maybe it has to do with complexity. I am still learning how the artifact works. Maevith seemed to consider and created a massive tray of some type of pasta dish. He tentatively tasted it and then smiled. It tastes just like I remember it. Maevith put some on a plate and offered it to me. I tried it, and the dish was mostly bland, with some pungent chunks of cheese and a thick, oily sauce. It is good. I offered my filtered opinion to the Goliath. It was all fake, but my taste buds still had me salivating. Maevith started eating everything on the table, and I just watched him for a bit. We will leave after 5 hours and see if you are any better. Nothing is wrong with me, Eric, he said while ripping meat off a large turkey leg with his teeth. I didn't want to explain depression and irritability from lack of sleep to the Goliath, so I just let him eat. After he finished getting his fill of the food and asking a dozen questions about what things were on the table, we moved into the Ankeg chamber. Do you want to fight a monster? I willed one of the two giant crawfish-like creatures to surface, and Maevith jumped back, unconsciously materializing his club in his hand. It took Maevith some time to calm down. I don't know why you would want to fight monsters in here. You can. Maevith stopped talking and was focused intently behind me. I turned to see an obviously feminine Goliath. Maevith just stared as I studied her. Her gray skin, bald head, and emerald eyes reminded me of Maevith. She was shorter than him at only about 6'8" compared to Maevith's 7'6" frame, and had a leaner upper body and feminine chest with a muscular build. She spoke. Brother, why did you not help us? The orcs killed me and took Myra. Shit, Maevith's guilt was imprinted on his manifestation of his sister. I focused, took control of the female Goliath and directed its speech. I forgive you, brother. You could not have done anything to stop it, and they would have killed you if you had intervened. Mavith was tearing up and sobbing. You don't know that, Zarana. I might have been able to turn the tide and get you to a healer in the village. Let it go, Mavith, she reasserted. I had the female Goliath move into him and hug him. Mavith's massive body was suddenly racked with heaving sobs as he squeezed his sister tight. I couldn't stop tears of my own being released at the scene. I let him have a bit of private time with her and returned to the entry room to do a bit of studying. I could hear the two of them talking, both with deep baritones. Eventually, Mavith came back to the entry room. Thank you, Eric. I know it was not real, but I missed her so much. I got a chance to say goodbye. Mavith's eyes were puffy, which made little sense in here unless he wanted it like that. I walked back into the Ankeg room to find Zarana studying the creature. I sent her to the room to play with Oscar and the others. When Mavith saw she was gone, he just nodded. I think I would like to kill some monsters, Eric. Can you dream up some orcs? I never met an orc. I think you should do it, I replied as orc after orc materialized in the first Ankeg room. After the seventh orc appeared, they stopped. 3 of the orcs had nets, so I assumed these were the orcs that had killed his sister. They generally fell in what I imagined the race looked like, except they appear civilized. They wore tailored clothes under their armor and had unblemished skin and well-trimmed hair. Mavith entered the fight before me, and I got to see a side of Mavith that I had never seen before. He was a violent and powerful Goliath who ignored wounds to his body to get a killing blow on his foe. The orcs were mildly decent swordsmen, but not a challenge for me unless I got netted. I only needed to use a single air shield to avoid the nets, so it never reached me. We killed the 7 orcs 3 times before Mavith's lust for vengeance was finally satiated. I can now see why you would want to practice your fighting skills here. Maybe we can do this again sometime. His voice rang with satisfaction. It has been out 6 hours, so let's get some breakfast and see what Castile wants to do. We exited the dreamscape, and I found Mavith's hand on my chest, reaching up from his position on the floor to grasp the amulet. Benito was standing over me. Eric, I am hurt. You let the big man into your dreams, but wouldn't let me. I am much more fun than him. I sat up, working the kinks out of my back. Mavith has control over his ether and can activate the amulet. Besides Benito, who says you do not already haunt my dreams, I teased Benito. Benito gave me a confused and dubious look. He shook his head, giving up on puzzling it out. Castile wants to see you, Eric. Bet you and her are going to have fancy dreams together too. Benito's voice was slightly harsh and accusatory, and he lacked his normal joviality. Something was definitely affecting us. I knocked and walked in on Castile and Adrian talking quietly. Delmar is leading a trip for firewood. Did the Goliath succeed? Castile asked pointedly. Mavith was able to use it. I think it helped him. I replied to Castile's nod. Good. I have a plan. There is a spell called Nightmare. It is an advanced form of the sleep spell, but it is the only spell I reviewed while at the Mage College that forces the target into a dream state. I want to borrow your amulet to learn it. Castile looked at me expectantly. I produced the amulet and handed it to her. Adrian added, Eric, if you have any food stored away, now would be a suitable time to share. The men are fraying from hunger and exhaustion, and I fear we may see fighting soon. I looked at Castile, who had a blank expression. She had obviously told him I had reserves. I placed 14 meal bars on the desk. His eyes went wide. Anything else? I produced a small wrapped bundle of food from when I had left the Legionnaire training. I had never touched it. There were maybe 8 or 9 pounds of food in the bundle. Adrian carefully went through it, frowning the entire time. I could tell he realized how long I had the food as it had date stamps from the Legion training camp on the items. I was clearly revealing my abilities to him, but Castile said he could be trusted. So I decided to trust him as well, if only a little more. I was just as thin as everyone else, so I was obviously not partaking in the food. He didn't ask if I had any more. He just mumbled that Delmar was going to accuse me of hoarding food. It was the only thing that made sense when food just appeared out of nowhere. Adrian finally said unhappily, 3 more days of food here for the company. Welcome, but not enough to make a huge difference. I produced the large 3-gallon jar of honey on the desk. Delmar's eyebrows went up as the jar was obviously bigger than my space as he knew it. He opened it and tasted crystals. Honey, I nodded. Another 3 days, he said, expecting me to produce more. I shrugged, indicating that was it. I still had 20 gallons of rum and whiskey along with about 3 dozen ration bars. The 2 backpacks from the Griffin Rider and Summoner that probably had some food in them as well. But I would hold that in reserve for now. Castile seemed to consider. If I spent all day in the Dreamscape amulet, I might be able to learn the nightmare spell in a week if fortune favors me. It is a difficult spell, but the amulet does focus your efforts, allowing for faster learning. We need to keep clearing the specters from the lower layers, Castile, Adrian pronounced in a clearly scripted speech. Castile tapped the kettle of souls on the desk, a small smile on her face. It is just like a normal collector, Eric. You aim the artifact at the disrupted body and push your ether into the device. It will feel slightly wrong as it pulls in the death essence, but that is normal. I didn't like where this was going. What if we encounter another Wight, or something more dangerous? Constantine, Adrian, Blaze, and Brutus will go with you. Just work the periphery of the complex for now. She held up the amulet. I think this is more important for the moment. After my own time in the dreamscape, I can sense some of the men ready to break. Adrian offered a weak, haggard smile. The good news is the Elven wine appears viable, Eric. Most of our descents will focus on recovering as many bottles as we can. How is this going to be explained? I gestured at the honey and food. I will take responsibility, and we will dole it out slowly, Castile said. We are lucky you had it, Eric. I winced, remembering I had given away a few weeks of food just before we left to the old women who ran the herbalist shop in Sobrel. It was not the first time I was lamenting that decision. Delmar entered the room in a huff. The men are getting lazy, not carrying up a full load of shelving to burn. He noticed me and asked tersely, what is he doing here? He noticed the food. He was still clearly upset. I left them to get my breakfast of broth and rice. As I sat down next to Mavith, he looked down at me, showing a smile for the first time since we got trapped in the city. Eric, do you want to play a game of checkers? I was okay with temporarily giving up my dreamscape amulet as I was not getting out of here alone. Castile was probably our best chance if we had to confront the summoner or if we eventually got into the dungeon, and for what it was worth, I trusted her. The temperature had remained cold outside, and the snow depth had not dropped, so we were unlikely to walk out of the city anytime soon. After losing 2 games of checkers to an improved and somewhat smiling Mavith, I was back in my room with Matteo and Felix. Matteo was giving me the stink eye, so I offered, Castile has the amulet. Maybe she will let you try to use it. His eyes looked hopeful and then fell. Maybe after this mess. Is the wine giving you the squirts too? What? I was caught off guard and confused by the conversation's direction. Felix looked over and clarified for me. Some of us have been squirting out the arse after drinking the wine. It is not poisonous, Constantine said from the archway. Most likely it is because you are not getting enough solid food, he directed his attention to me. Castile said you are to start making the spectre culling runs and bringing up more of the wine. Yes, I am to take the Kettle of Souls and use it in Castile's stead while she works on solving another problem. I answered him, looking at Constantine more closely. It looked like he had aged 10 years in the last week. Good, get it. And we can begin. Now. Brutus, Blaze, and Adrian are with us? I nodded. I will collect them and meet you at the stairs. I soon had the brass kettle in my hands. Castile had emptied the crystallized death essence into a bag, so it was currently empty. I turned it over and over and over under the light of a glowstone Blaze was carrying beside me. The runic writing was on the inside of the device, and I couldn't make it out very well. Don't damage that, Eric. It is the only thing that is giving us a chance to get out of here, Adrian said from behind me. I nodded, stopped trying to inspect it, and got a better grip on the device. We were all following closely behind Constantine, who turned in the corridor and opened a large door. The door creaked ominously, and light spilled out when it opened. Constantine noted, Castile has been charging the glowstones in the walls below as we explored. You should just focus on using your ether on that device. You start to get low, and we will ascend. It appeared Constantine was in charge of the party over Adrian. It made sense, as Constantine was the scout, Adrian said annoyedly. Constantine, we are just making runs to the wine vault. Okay, maybe Constantine just thought he was in charge. Constantine paused to confront Adrian. Even if Castile's plan works, we still have to find the dungeon to survive the winter. More specters Eric can send to their final rest every trip. The faster that will be. Adrian flexed his grip on his sword, and we all felt some tension in the air between them. Instead of addressing Constantine, he addressed me to avoid a confrontation. Eric, let me know when you are too tired, or your ether gets too low, to continue. I nodded, not wanting an argument to break out. I think Adrian's restraint was rooted in his knowledge of how the city was affecting him. We descended the stone stairs into a well-lit corridor with glow stones every 20 feet. A single small elf girl specter was wandering aimlessly in the center. Constantine walked forward and unceremoniously cut her down in a flash of sparks. It was weird how only his runic weapon seemed to give those special effects. I had yet to see any other weapon do something as flashy. I got closer to where the specter had dissipated. I aimed the kettle and channeled ether into it like I did with the collector. The purple smoke rushed toward the kettle and was consumed like a vacuum. A strange cold and wrongness pricked across my body. My breath was momentarily lost, like I had stepped outside into frigid air. The coldness permeated my lungs for just a breath. Castile had said it would feel slightly wrong, but that was a massive understatement, and I had to wonder how high her ether tolerance was to feel just slightly wrong. Maybe her ether resistance had something to do with it. It felt like I was bathed in the creature's death aura as it was harvested. I shook the kettle to confirm it worked, and a small amount of the purple-black glittering sand was in the bottom. Adrian was waiting on me. It worked. How many of these did Castile do every day? I had no idea how she subjected herself to that feeling over and over again. I was looking at Castile's toughness in a new light. This was going to be very unpleasant for me. Constantine answered, "Over 100 every descent. How many can you manage with your ether, Eric?" I examined my ether core. It didn't take a lot of ether. It is more of the backlash from using it. I don't know how she managed it so many times, Adrian gravely voiced. She is a tough one. Just let us know when you need to ascend, Eric. As we walked the corridor, Brutus and Constantine were out front, Blaze at my side, and Adrian guarding the rear. There were dozens of large wooden doors lining the hallway. Constantine passed them all by without hesitation. 4 lone specters later, I almost felt like asking to return to the tower. My lungs ached like I had run a marathon, and my fingers were numb. Constantine stopped at the door, pushed it open slowly, and peeked inside. Clear. He entered, and we followed. Racks upon racks of wine bottles were present. Brutus was the most flummoxed. "There has to be at least 10,000 bottles in here," Adrian answered. "More. Eric, fill your space and Blaze and I will fill our packs." I picked up a green glass bottle and brushed the dust off. Imprinted in the glass was a scene of an elf hunting a gnoll. I remember Adrian said the gnolls were the mortal enemies of the elves or something like that. Each bottle was its own unique carved piece of artwork. Different colored glass in innumerable scenes. Every once in a while, Constantine said a bottle that I picked up was no good. His ability to know if something was an organic poison coming through, maybe. I added 24 bottles and Blaze had 10 wrapped bottles in his backpack. Adrian had 11. Constantine and Brutus were not carrying packs as they were scouting ahead and needed to remain unencumbered. Adrian considered our next course of action. "Constantine, we will swing by the children's shelter, clear it, and head back to the tower." Constantine nodded appreciatively and led the way. It seemed we were heading back toward the tower, but I needed to spend more time in this unfamiliar underground maze to be sure. We descended a wide stairway into a large chamber that was lit by only a few glowstones. Hundreds of small skeletons were scattered across the room. We cleared this room of hundreds of specters, and now we usually find less than a dozen specters here every descent, Adrian informed the group. I scanned the room and could see only a single specter in the corner, a small boy, by the looks of it. Constantine had us wait for a good 20 minutes before walking confidently into the room. 3 specters of children rose out of the floor to rush us, as did the boy. Constantine and Brutus dealt with them, and I completed my task with the kettle, wincing with each use. "Leave it, Legionnaire!" Adrian barked, startling everyone. We turned to find Blaze sifting through the bones. "We don't have time to loot the dead or the energy to carry the spoils unless it is a runic weapon." Blaze stood and dropped a ring he had picked up. The metal sounded louder than it should be on the stone. 4 adult specters emerged from the wall to the right, their faces twisted in a silent scream. Adrian yelled, "Back up the stairs!" "It may be a rush." As we retreated up the stairs, Brutus asked, "What is a rush?" "We took positions at the top of the stairs to fight the 4 specters. Once the 4 specters were dead," Adrian answered. "Sometimes something triggers a bunch of the specters to come at us at once. Usually there is a poltergeist or 2 in the rush, though we haven't seen a rush in the shelter in a while." After I gathered the death essence of the 4 specters with the kettle, I broke down a bit. "Adrian, I think I am done. I am shivering uncontrollably and have a pounding headache." Constantine frowned, clearly disappointed in me. "That was, 13? This isn't going to work, Adrian. We need Castile." I focused on Constantine and angrily said, "Can't you use either as well, Constantine?" I held up the kettle, offering it to him. Constantine looked down at his runic weapon and then at the kettle of souls. "I need to keep swinging my blade. You should push your limit, Eric. Let's find 1 or 2 more wandering specters before heading back," he said, somehow sounding rational. "It is up to you, Eric. I know Castile found the experience unpleasant, but I don't think there is a limit on how many times she could use it," Adrian said, deferring to me. I hesitantly nodded my consent. 6 specters later, we were climbing the stairs to the tower. My body was racked with chills that never seemed to end. Firth was at the top of the stairs. "About time you are back. We have 5 specters in the main library, and we have been subduing them, waiting for the kettle." I groaned, but turned around with just Constantine and Adrian as support. After the library was cleared, I shivered uncontrollably as we walked back to the tower. I didn't think I could do this every day. I had no idea how Castile managed this. Adrian put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did good work today, Eric. Leave the wine and kettle in Castile's room. I will get you a double serving of tonight's feast and meet you there." Castile was prone on the floor, eyes closed on the bedroll in front of the fire, gripping the amulet. Delmar looked up from his chair. He was watching over her and tending the fire. I placed the bottles from my dimensional space on the desk and the kettle, while Delmar watched me. Castile said she knew. Delmar said flatly. I didn't know what he was referring to, so I just nodded slowly. "You should go in there and bring her out." He motioned to Castile. My first thought was not a problem, but I would have preferred for Adrian to arrive first. I sat on the other side of Castile. I stalled. "Adrian is bringing dinner. Right after I eat, I will retrieve Castile. Using the kettle takes a lot out of you." Delmar shrugged and took the fire poker to stir the coals and add a board. We sat in silence, and Adrian entered a few minutes later with both backpacks of wine bottles and a bowl. He handed me the bowl. "Lurkin is stretching the ration bars. The men say this soup is not terrible." He looked at Castile on the floor and sat on another chair. He addressed Delmar. "It went well. The specters seemed to be thinning in the area we patrolled." Delmar replied. The scholar found a map of the city folded into one of the books. Adrian immediately perked up. Delmar waved his hand dismissively. "He found what he believes is the dungeon entrance, but it is on the other side of the city, just beyond the hearth tree." I was a little surprised by this great news. "Damn it, really?" Adrian bemoaned. "I didn't understand what the problem was. Do you have any good news?" "Nope. We are out of healing potions and salves. Dante and Remus' frostbite is much worse. Might have to amputate their toes. I tried the soup, and it reminded me of warm fig pudding. It was probably wishful thinking, but I kept the imagery up as I ate." Delmar and Adrian continued their conversation. "Has she come out since we left?" "No, I was going to send in Eric to get her," Delmar responded flatly. I put down the empty bowl. "Why is it bad news that we know where the dungeon is?" Delmar shook his head like I was an idiot. "It is fantastic news, Eric," he replied a little too harshly for my liking. "It is just the fact it is on the other side of a city infested with undead, and we are going to be surviving off of wine while we cross the city inch by inch, while half of us lose our minds." Delmar was not an optimist. I think I will go check on Castile now, I said, sinking to the floor and touching the amulet. Castile was studying one of her spellbooks on a couch in the entry room, looking very comfortable. She had a coffee table in front of her with an assortment of food and beverages. She looked up, surprised. Is everything okay? I vented my frustration. Other than Delmar being ready to snap, things are fine. Also, what the hell, Castile? The Kettle of Souls feels like it is sucking the soul out of me. Constantine is pushing me harder than ever before, and they found the location of the dungeon. Castile slowly closed the spellbook and looked me over. Do you feel better yelling that out loud? A bit, I admitted. I probably wouldn't get any chances to yell at Castile in the real world. Using the Kettle of Souls works against your either tolerance, Eric. Your tolerance was 22 with a potential of 50? Castile recalled. I think so. I thought about it. Yes. Then you shouldn't have any trouble using it. I told you it would be unpleasant. You should also be able to train your ether tolerance by using it, she said patiently. Delmar will hold it together. I will handle him if he falls too far. The sooner I learn this, she tapped the book, the better off we all will be. How is a spell called Nightmare going to help anyway? I said, relaxing some as I waited for her to answer. I decide what the nightmare is when I cast it. It is like a predetermined dream. It is intended to break a person's mind, but doesn't have to be used that way, she explained. Is the shimmering labyrinth where the scholar thought it was? No. It is not under the hearth tree, but it is close, just on the other side of it, I relayed, and Castile winced. Well, at least we know where we are going now. Hopefully the underground network has a path to it. As for Constantine, keep an eye on him. I think his elven runic weapon may be influencing him. Castile said indifferently. Nothing to be too concerned about at the moment. It was forged to kill the undead, and may be encouraging him to fulfill its purpose. Have you noticed that his sword sparks when it comes in contact with the specters? That is the sword enacting its purpose, disrupting the enemy it was created to destroy, Castile explained. Adrian and Delmar already know to keep an eye on Constantine. Is there anything else? Castile seemed so calm it was almost disturbing knowing how dire our situation currently was. They sent me in here to get you out for a while, I said finally. Castile frowned. She tapped the spellbook. Tell them I will be out in 2 hours, and to have something ready to eat for me. I plan to come right back after eating. I hope to start practicing the aetherweaves soon. This is really a remarkable space, Eric. It is so easy to focus in here. I might be able to learn the spell in just a few days. She picked up something that looked like a cookie and munched on it. Seeing I had nothing else for her, she opened the spellbook and returned to studying. I felt like I was being abused a little bit. Then again, Castile had been the one using the Kettle of Souls repeatedly for days. This was her mini-vacation at my expense. I exited the dreamscape and told Adrian and Delmar that Castile would be out in 2 hours. I also told them all they needed to do was remove the amulet from contact with her body to wake her. There was no need to go inside the dreamscape to retrieve her. I returned to my room to find my roommates deep into their second bottle of wine. Maveth was playing checkers with Constantine on my desk bed, and Matteo and Felix were clearly intoxicated. They offered me the residuals of a bottle, and I passed. Constantine was playing with the steel spheres I found in the desk. He was rolling them in one hand. "Can I have my balls back?" I said to Constantine as I held out my hand for them. "Or do you enjoy playing with them much?" Matteo and Felix looked up from the checkers board between them and were holding back their laughter. Constantine looked up, a single eyebrow arcing. "Did you know these balls are platinum, Eric?" Constantine and Maveth continued playing checkers on the desk, preventing me from lying down. Constantine noted the spheres in his hand. They appeared to be ingots for making rings. I continued holding out my hand for the balls. Constantine regretfully dropped them into my hand, and I sent them to my storage for safekeeping. I took my canteen and sat on the bench by the fire. The fire felt warmer and more invigorating than normal, and I scooted the bench closer. "Platinum is very valuable, Eric," Maveth intoned as he cornered Constantine's last piece. much more so than gold. It carries runic enchantments much better than most metals and never tarnishes. Constantine nodded in agreement, frustration on his face for losing the game. He appraised me. How are you feeling? There was only a mild note of concern in his tone, though more than I expected after our earlier interaction. I held my hands closer to the fire, deciding what to admit. I didn't want to appear weak, but Constantine would push me harder if I admitted I could manage it. I tossed a board on the fire. I managed today. The scholar found the dungeon location today. By their lack of reaction, they already knew. Constantine nodded somberly. Yes, we are going to search for more runic weapons tomorrow. You are going to have to be able to do thrice what you did today with the Kettle of Souls. 60 at a minimum each day if we are going to reach the dungeon before we all die of starvation. Castile told me it would get easier the more I used it. Maybe not 60 tomorrow, but I will get there. I sounded confident. But my body shook at the memory of using the bronze artifact. I hid my body's unease by stirring in the coals. Matteo suddenly stood and rushed out of the room, having to take a squirt. He left the door open in his rush, and we cursed him for letting the heat out. "Felix, close the door!" Constantine ordered as they started another game of checkers. "Last one. Mavis, Eric needs his rest." Constantine winked at me like he was doing me a favor, giving me my bed. The next morning I had to force myself to eat. My appetite was gone. Constantine gave me twice as much rice and beans as everyone else had received. He then went to talk with the scholar. As breakfast ended and men started on their daily tasks, Castile made an appearance, Delmar and Adrian at her back. She looked pale and thin, but her eyes were bright, telling me her mind was sharp. She looked across the room slowly, making eye contact with everyone. "We will be getting out of this. You are the strongest company in the Lion. I could promise you rewards beyond measure from the plunder of the city, but instead I want to affirm to each of you that your lives are more important. The undead will not break you. The cold will not break you, and the unseen summoner will not break you." Castile's passion was met with some nods, but a few still remained indifferent. I could see Adrian noting who in his mind. Delmar rapped his knuckles on the shelf loudly. "We are moving to the underground tomorrow. We learned everything we needed to here." That got whispers. Scholar Fabian looked around longingly at all the books he had not had a chance to study. Delmar continued. "It will be warmer down there, and we will save time advancing through the city. We will be dressing back in full armor kit starting today. Get to your daily tasks, men." With that said, Adrian walked toward me and handed me the kettle. "Constantine and I will be at your front today, just blaze at your back. Let us know when you need a rest. Gear up, Legionnaire," he said with a pat on my shoulder. Putting on my armor again was almost surreal. It was like the set had been made for a giant. I had trouble getting everything to fit tightly. I walked out into the communal area and noticed my elven dagger on Firth's belt. I approached the veteran, demanding my dagger back. "Firth, you have a runic sword now. Give me back my dagger." Firth looked me over and drew the dagger. "This is too pretty a weapon for you, Eric." He balanced the blade on his index finger and spun it, the blade and handle whirling. "I have never handled such a perfectly weighted sticker. How much do you want for it?" "I'm not selling it." I held out my hand. Firth considered me again and nodded slowly. He tossed, snatched, and sheathed the blade and handed it to me. It took me some time to feed the sheath on my belt, but soon I was ready. A few men nodded in appreciation at my reclamation of the runic dagger. Our armor clattered as we descended the stairs together. Normally it had a rhythm to it, but not any longer with it being so loose. Blaze asked, "Why the armor now?" Constantine answered him while playing with his straps. "In case we run into a Wight wielding a weapon," Adrian contradicted Constantine. "We are to secure the wine room this trip. I know we talked about looking for more runic weapons last night, but Castile thought the men needed to see us making progress toward a goal," Adrian replied evenly. Constantine looked ready to object, but nodded and continued to lead the way. It was more of a slow walk today, and we didn't see any specters for a few minutes. Blaze asked, "Where do all the doors go? Some are more storerooms. Others lead up into other buildings in the city." Constantine paused at a door. "This faded writing here says where the door leads." I took out my own glowstone to examine the faded elven script on the stone. Some type of restaurant, I translated with my poor Elvish. Do you think they are open? Blaze asked seriously. I know it is early in the morning and all. He started to smile at his joke. We all started laughing, and Adrian chuckled. Well, if they are open, breakfast is on me. When things simmered down, Constantine gave a reality check. We only took one stairway up to the city. Building had collapsed on the stairs. But that didn't stop 3 specters from coming through the rubble to greet us. We want to avoid triggering a rush from the city. If we stirred the city, it could have hundreds of specters after us. That sobered things up pretty quickly, so we continued on in silence. We encountered just 2 specters on the way to the wine room. Inside the wine room, Adrian ordered Constantine, I want you to go through every bottle and dump the toxic ones. Castile doesn't want anyone drinking them by mistake. That was how we spent our next 4 hours, dumping the wine bottles down the drain after Constantine pulled them off the racks. After that, we searched a handful of nearby storerooms for specters before returning to the tower. I only harvested 9 specters all day, and was greatly relieved at the lower number of times activating the kettle. As we climbed the stairs, the most divine smell in the world assaulted our noses. We rushed into the small library to find a bird spinning on an improvised spit. Men were talking energetically and keeping their eyes on it. I guessed what the bird was. Baby eagle? It was the size of a turkey, so it was definitely not one of the monstrous adults. Felix answered excitedly. Flavius got an owl that entered the main library. My stomach can't wait to make its acquaintance. It was most likely a scout controlled by the summoner, Delmar said from across the room. It saw us packing up from the window and wanted to know where we were planning to go. Delmar is correct. The summoner sent it, and I'm certain it is not poisoned. He just made a slight error in his impatience. He has remained a few miles away, tired of waiting us out, Castile said neutrally, and sounded in control. The good news is, he is too busy maintaining his hold of the storm elementals to summon anything else. Once we disappear into the Undercity, we may lose his focus. For some reason, I doubted Castile's optimism. Still, her counter to Delmar's pessimism brightened the mood. There was a lot less meat than it originally looked like. Everyone got an equal share, and no one complained. The feathers were stuffed into a small bag, and then the bones were boiled, along with the feet, for breakfast broth the next day. The fresh meat, although somewhat acidic tasting, cheered everyone up. I made sure to lay out on my desk before Mavith could start his nightly checkers tournament with Constantine. I needed to sleep myself, and after a few minutes of twisting and turning, I snuck myself an oblivion pill in the absence of the amulet. Constantine took pleasure in waking me from my deep sleep in the morning. Eric, he whispered next to my ear while snapping his fingers in my face. If I was a goblin, I would have stabbed you 5 times already. I slapped away his hand and sat up. Just as I had guessed, the non-magical oblivion pills did not seem to give me restful sleep in the city. A thought crossed my mind. Are goblins edible? I asked, remembering I had one of the creatures in my dimensional storage. Mavith answered from the floor where he was packing. They probably taste worse than the owl from last night, but I do not think they are poisonous. I nodded, thinking that tiny creature had to be at least 40 pounds. Maybe I could release it and pretend it wandered into the city. With everyone moving out of the tower, it meant Castile could handle the kettle duties today. I hesitated in the room, being the last to leave the small library. I looked longingly at the large black desk. Not only was it a piece of artwork, but it was a good bed. I checked outside the door and then stored the large desk. The top was 3 by 7 feet, and the height was about 2 feet tall, and it might serve as a good obstruction or workbench for me. I caught up with everyone and walked next to Castile, who handed me the Kettle of Souls so she could practice her ether shaping of the nightmare spell. So much for a break for myself. She was not much of a conversationalist today, fully concentrating on learning the spell as quickly as possible. We only encountered a single specter on the way to the wine vault, and I used the kettle to deal with it. When the doors opened, everyone who had not seen it yet gasped and gawked while walking stupidly among the racks. Delmar issued his proclamation. No one drinks without permission. I will assign you all sleeping locations. We piss in the drain and shit in the storeroom across the hall in pairs. That is right. His voice rose to a command. No one shits alone. It took a few hours to settle in as Delmar was in charge of camp setup. It helped him direct some of his increasingly aggressive nature productively. Adrian assigned the guard duties, of which I had none. Constantine pulled on my armor. "Come on, Eric, no one shits alone." Mavis stood. "I haven't shit in 3 days. I think I might have to." "Fine, you can come too. Could use a brute," Constantine said, irritated. I could already tell we were not going for a shit. In the hallway, Constantine went left and walked rapidly while we followed. "I don't have the Kettle of Souls," I warned him. He looked to be on the hunt for more specters, or maybe his blade was driving him to hunt. "It is fine. It is just a few doors down," he explained, as he continued walking. He paused at a door, studied it, and opened it. We followed him inside, and on the other side of the room were heavy bunk beds. Thick dust from deteriorated mattresses covered them, but this could be a game changer. Too heavy to haul up into the tower, but 40 feet down the hall. I think that is manageable. Mavith and I wrestled the first one out the door while Constantine watched for specters. My fatigued and emaciated muscles could not match Mavith's, so we made quite a racket to get the first one into the wine room. There were 8 bunks for 16 beds in total, and soon the whole company was helping. It was the most animated I had seen Delmar in a long time. We moved wine bottles and took down racks to make room. Delmar thought the wine room was more defensible than the small room from which we took the beds. The next small room with bunks was too far away to haul back, but we could sleep in shifts. Everyone was covered in filth when we were done, but the sense of accomplishment was high in the company. Some of the soldiers were actually smiling and making jokes to one another. The only unhappy person was Scholar Fabian, due to the fact that he was only able to carry 10 of his priceless books from the tower. We were allotted a little more wine than we probably should have had that evening. I noted that Adrian and Delmar didn't drink and remained on watch with Castile using the amulet. We were in a new phase of our exploration of the ruins, but the clock was still running on us. We had already too many days in Kaelora, sustaining ourselves on extraordinarily very little. Living off calories from wine was not going to be very pleasant. The move had abated some of the depression, but it would soon return. For the next 3 days, Adrian, Brutus, Constantin, Matteo, and Blaze guarded me as we started to explore the hearth tree and thin the specters in preparation for finding the dungeon. Blaze got knocked out when a poltergeist threw a heavy ceramic bowl at his head from behind, but we did well other than that one injury. I was up to between 40 and 45 specters in the morning, and another 25 or so in the afternoon as we slowly explored new areas. We were also searching rooms Constantine had not searched previously. One interesting room had a familiar Divitian assessment tablet, but it was a modest table, similar to the one I used in the capital at the Adventurers Guild in the capital. It was also much fancier, with finer wood and decorative carvings, and the language was clearly Elvish after I cleared the dust off. "Leave it. It is useless anyway, as it is based on the Elven race," Constantine advised, leaving the room without giving it another thought. However, it had all the attributes and 21 magic affinities on the table. Even if it gave skewed results, it was probably worth something. Constantine called from the corridor. "We should head back anyway. This corridor is heading away from the hearth tree." I did not know how he knew that, but I was sure he would explain it in excruciating detail later if I didn't ask. I made sure I was the last one out of the room, and sent the entire assessment tablet table into my dimensional storage. It was only about 3 by 5 feet, and the height was similar to the black desk I had stored a week earlier, and I had a lot of space if I got creative. We got even better news when we returned to the wine vault. Castile had successfully learned the nightmare spell. I was thrilled, as it meant that hopefully I would get my amulet back soon, as this place was beginning to affect me like the others. Castile used her nightmare spell on 7 men, including Delmar, to start. They were the worst of the company, with sunken, dark eyes and the worst disposition. It was to be a 12-hour sleep on the bunks for them. Trapped in some dream, Castile imagined. Everyone nervously watched as Castile forced man after man into a deep sleep. When Castile was finished, she was seated on her bunk bed alone, clearly drained from her efforts. I took the opportunity to talk with her and sat next to her. I asked, "What are they dreaming about?" Castile looked around at the sleeping men. They are building houses. The spell required a task and environment on casting. I put them on a grassy plain, and they are cutting and stacking sod to build a house. It was what I remembered of where I grew up. No monsters. Just endless therapeutic labor with a loving family encouraging them. I nodded, thinking that was not too bad of a nightmare. I certainly had much worse. So, will you be joining the exploration team now? Castile had a small knife out and was cleaning under her filthy fingernails. Yes, I will be going out. She knew why I was here. Castile fingered the amulet around her neck absently but did not offer it to me. When she did not offer it back to me, I asked, "Can I have that back?" I didn't think she heard me, so I was about to ask again. "I would like to keep using it," she said softly. My stomach turned over, and a cold chill spread through my body. She quickly added, "I think we can run 2 exploration teams. One will be led by me, and the other will be led by you. While you are out, I desire to use your... When you return, wake me, and you can have it." That sounded completely reasonable. As my mage commander, she probably could have just kept it even though she recognized it as my property. I think that is acceptable. "Are you going to learn another spell?" Castile held the amulet again, studying it longingly, not answering for a time. For me, a single day studying in the amulet is like a week. I could learn every spell I ever tried to study and failed. "You do not realize what a treasure it truly is." Her tone was slightly accusatory and had some jealousy in it. Realizing she may have crossed a line, she added, "It is yours, Eric. Perhaps I have become a little addicted to it." She removed the dreamscape amulet and handed it to me. Perhaps a few days apart from it would do me good. After an hour's discussion, she announced to everyone not sleeping, Adrian, Brutus, Blaze, and Matteo, "You are with me for a spectre harvest." Castile snatched the kettle and marched for the door while they scrambled to follow. I moved over to sit with Mavadith, who was sorting wine bottles with Constantine at a table. "Surprised she didn't take you," I noted, and Constantine looked up. "We just returned an hour ago, Eric. Castile decided the second team would be you, Flavius. Delmar, Firth, Benito, and me." Constantine revealed with a faux smile. "Damn, she got to pick all the cool kids," I said gruffly. Mavith didn't understand. "I think everyone is pretty cold, Eric, but it is warmer under the city than in the tower." Constantine cackled a laugh. "I think Eric is saying that he wishes he got to choose his own team. I am actually quite hurt you don't want me on your team." I don't know why I said it. I think it was probably because it had been a few days since I got some real sleep, and my mind felt frayed and exhausted. "Constantine, you are reckless. You chase every damn specter you see, regardless of whether it is safe for the rest of us or not. Of course, I don't want to explore with you the tunnels with you." I had yelled that a little too loud and a number of men overheard. All the attention in the wine vault was on us now. Constantine placed 2 bottles he had been holding on the table and looked me in the eyes, and I met his stare defiantly. Our eyes studied each other. He said softly, "You are right, Eric. I have been reckless." I exhaled in some relief. "We are running out of time, though." He reflectively touched the pommel of his runic weapon. "So, it is not your weapon driving you?" I accused him, getting bolder. Constantine's hand caressed the hilt while studying my face. He admitted, "It does reward me with a euphoric rush when I cut down a specter, but it is not controlling me." My mouth opened to reply, and then I shut it. Constantine was an addict, and didn't even realize it. "Perhaps you should loan your runic weapon to another, Constantine." My suggestion was met with harsh eyes. I remembered that Constantine had also recklessly pursued the summoner to reclaim this blade. I was not sure how he didn't see that he was beholden to the weapon. I decided not to press further. I walked over to Scholar Fabian to see about continuing my education in the Elven tongue. After an hour, I decided to get some rest. My mind had its fill of new vocabulary and listening to the scholar's voice. I went to an open bunk and lay down, leaving Constantine and Mavith. I had the amulet, and I wanted to get some actual rest. I entered the dreamscape and found the safe entry room filled with living room furniture and an entire kitchen. The bookshelf I had left Castile was now full of books as well. I mumbled to myself, "Castile, you have been a busy woman and made yourself at home." I flipped through each one of the books she left behind on the bookshelf and made a copy of the complete set. I then walked down to the scorpion room. Castile did not appear to have spent any time fighting the creatures of the dungeon. Either that or she reset them after she had killed them. After a quick inspection, it seemed that my secret room was undisturbed. I then set my copy of the books into my secret room and left, closing it behind me. Oscar rushed me and jumped into my arms to lick my face. It took me a moment to realize that was what I wanted. Constantine studied me with steel blue eyes. "You locked us all away here like prisoners. Are you going to let us out now?" I ignored his comment. "Did Castile stop by and say hello?" I asked the group. Mavith's sister, Zarana, spoke for the group. "She didn't find us. Is that what you are asking?" "She did come into the scorpion chamber once, though. She fought it and returned it back to normal." "Thanks for telling me, Zarana." I looked at the assortment of people and the Goliaths. "Well, let's practice some fighting tonight." Xavier, the sword master, eagerly drew his blade and stood from the poker table. Adrian was not far behind him. Mavith stood protectively next to his sister, resting his club on his shoulder. Blaze was the only one who did not look thrilled at the idea of weapons practice in the group. Oscar excitedly barked as I removed the wall, and we battled on the sand in the scorpion room. I spent 8 hours inside the dreamscape, and my perception of the world was different when I exited. It had felt filtered before, and now it was clear. The targets of Castile's nightmare spell were still in their forced sleep. Castile's group had not returned yet from their culling of specters, and the men were getting anxious. Constantine approached me. "I think I should go look for them. You need to stay here as you have a runic weapon to protect the others." The door suddenly opened, causing everyone to relax visibly as Castile entered with the others. "We encountered another Wight," Adrian announced. "It had a runic weapon." He tossed a sheathed short blade to Benito, who eagerly caught it. Castile also had good news. "We found passages blocked with roots, large enough that it can only be the hearth tree. We are getting closer to where the dungeon must be. We just have to find a way around the tree." Adrian balanced the news. "The roots have blocked and weakened some of the passages. One path was also completely blocked with snow." Everyone understood that meant it was exposed to the city above. Surprisingly, Scholar Fabian stood and said, "I would like to go on the next exploration. I am not doing much good here. Maybe I can help by reading the Elven engravings." It was true the scholar was not of much use to us anymore. He had been quiet studying his books, and maybe he figured the small allocation of food we used on him might be withheld soon. Almost all our solid rations were gone, and we were pretty much drinking our calories from the wine. Castile considered the scholar and handed me the Kettle of Souls. "Eric is leaving soon. You can go with his group, scholar." Her voice dropped so only I could hear. "Just eliminate as many specters as you can, and return. We will all go together tomorrow." "We are close, Eric," she said reassuringly and even cracked a smile on her thin face. I started getting ready and heard Benito ask while looking at his new weapon, which was shaped like a long slender leaf rounding out the last 2/3. "Why do only the Wights have runic weapons?" Adrian patiently answered him. "They are smarter than normal undead. They may not have wielded a runic weapon in life but have wandered the city long enough to find one and know what it is, and how powerful they are." "How many Wights are in the city?" Benito asked, causing everyone to still, creating a silence to listen to Adrian's answer. Adrian looked to Castile, who gave him a nod, which I assumed was the go-ahead to answer truthfully. "We think there are dozens in the city above. In the Undercity we do not think there are many." Everyone relaxed some at the news and continued their tasks. Before we left, I spent time with Adrian, Castile, and Constantine as they discussed the direction they had traveled, and where they found the passages that were blocked with roots. Constantine was leading my team, as I was just the kettle bearer. Castile cycled the sleepers under her spell. Those waking up were exhausted, but you could already tell they were in better shape mentally with their comments and liveliness. Delmar was barely speaking to anyone and moved languidly, probably realizing what an ass he had been for weeks. Firth, Delmar, and Constantine led my group. Firth was also waking up from his first deep sleep. He was more animated than Delmar as he talked. It felt like I had a foot in Pluto's realm and didn't even realize it. he told Constantine as we walked. I walked next to Scholar Fabian in the middle, who was trying to read every door we passed. The ancient elf writing had faded or flaked off, so he did not have a lot of success. Behind me were Flavius and Benito protecting our rear. We all followed Constantine as he knew exactly where he was leading us. Our job was just to clear specters and return. We only encountered lone specters as we moved into an unfamiliar part of the Undercity. We also reached a section where Castile had not charged any glowstones, and everyone took theirs out. Constantine faced the group at this point. This is as far they got. We are going to return to the wine vault and search side rooms as we go. Everyone was tense as we turned around. We had only found 7 spectators so far today. The first door had Scholar Fabian, informed the group. It is a cobbler's room. Inside was a large workshop with 3 specters. The shoes had all since rotted away, and we quickly finished off the specters. Why did they need a shoe store under the city? Benito asked after we finished clearing the room. The scholar answered, they were prepared for a long siege by the Legion. They were prepared to live under the city for years. We must be under the merchant quarter. This city used to be home to some of the greatest artisans in the world. They would not stop doing their professions even if a war were raging around them. We continued opening doors but skipping doors that led up to the city. Every time we were rewarded with 1 to 4 specters inside. It was as the scholar had said, and these were the specters of the artisans. The spectral clothes they wore were fancy and fashionable. Scholar Fabian suddenly got excited at the 9th door. It is a weaponsmith. There must be a forge on the other side of this door. Delmar looked at Constantine, and they both looked like kids about to raid a candy store. Constantine repeated the same thing he had for each of the last few entries. I will go first. Delmar will go left. Firth will go right after me. Don't get distracted. Cut down the specters quickly so Eric can use the kettle. Constantine tried to open the door, but it didn't budge. The moisture in this part of the Undercity had rotted the door some. Delmar and Constantine worked together, and they were able to pry it off the hinges with a lot of effort. Constantine rushed and shouldered the door. The door spun, freed from its prison, and slammed into the ground inside the forge room, causing a thick cloud of dust, made worse as the glowstones illuminated the particles. The thick cloud of dust caused 0 visibility. Constantine rushed into the room with Delmar and Firth. Does anyone see any specters? Delmar said through coughing fits. I don't see anything, Benito replied from beside me. A body was thrown out of the room and slammed into me, knocking me into the wall in the corridor. It was Firth who looked broken and choked out a warning. Wight! Where? Constantine's voice echoed in the dust cloud from inside the forge room. A figure rushed toward me from the dust, and I erected an air shield in front of me. The emaciated elf crashed into my air shield, just a foot from my face. It looked like a zombie elf, its gray skin stretched tight over its bones. Firth was trying to stand, but struggling. Delmar screamed in obvious pain. I have specters in the forge. I need help in here, Constantine yelled, frustrated as I could see flashes of his sword through the dust cloud. Where is the Wight? My black blade stabbed forward into the stomach of the Wight, but it just pressed forward, trapping my blade. It screamed a raspy, angry yell at me. In the corridor, I shouted. Benito attacked, and the Wight punched him in the chest, tossing him sprawling back down the corridor. His clawed hands then left deep gouges on my armor. Constantine rushed out of the dust cloud and hacked into the neck of the Wight. Instead of sparks, the blade hissed and steamed as he connected. I couldn't extract my black blade, so I drew the Elven dagger and stabbed the Wight in the eye. It suddenly paused in its attack, looking confused. Constantine hacked the other side of its neck, freeing its head from its body. The dust was clearing, but Delmar was still screaming for help. Use the kettle, Eric! Constantine yelled as he dashed back into the room to help Delmar. The dust was clearing but not fast enough. I aimed the kettle and channeled aether into it. A thick purple smoke came from the corpse of the Wight, and felt almost like a brief tug-o-war as it resisted a final death. It finally succumbed to the bronze kettle, and a palpable relief escaped me. I turned my attention to Firth, who was moaning in pain. One arm clearly broken. I am fine. Help the others, He pushed me away with his good arm. Flavius rushed into the room as the dust was clearing. I entered after him. The forge room was large, and its expanse briefly took me aback. Easily 200 feet deep, Delmar was on the ground to the left. He was no longer screaming for help. Constantine was swinging wildly at 4 specters around him, sparks flying with every swing of the blade. "Use the kettle! There were at least 9 specters, maybe more if Delmar killed some." Constantine sounded frantic and worried. I used the kettle, and it eventually pulled 11 specters into it. With the room now clear, we all stood over Delmar. His scraggly bearded face was pale white, and his eyes looked up and vacant. Damn it, he was definitely dead. Benito was to my right and asked that exact question. Is he dead? Is he going to turn into a specter? Constantine let out a long, disgruntled sigh. Yes. Constantine stood over Delmar. He studied the Legionnaire's body and then said with remorse, "Did anyone else get hit by the specters or Wight?" Firth was cradling his broken arm. "The Wight broke my arm." Constantine moved to stand in front of Firth and study him. "Just the one injury? Do you feel any different?" "My fucking arm is broken, Constantine." "Of course I feel fucking different," Firth yelled, spittle flying from his mouth. "Eric cut off Delmar's head and used the kettle on him." Constantine barked at me while we were all still in a daze. I looked at Delmar's corpse, not processing the request. What? His spirit is going to turn into a specter. You can prevent that before it happens," Constantine yelled, his anger bleeding out. He kicked over a rack of swords. The violence and noise were therapeutic for him. I walked to the body and readied my black blade, but it just felt wrong to cut off Delmar's head, so I hesitated. Constantine stormed over and used his own runic blade to complete the task, steam hissing up as he did so. I fumbled for the kettle and used it. A purple haze flowed from Delmar's neck and head into the kettle. It was proof that he had been turning, but it still did not make me feel any better. Benito was walking around the room, looking at all the various weapons. I think he was having trouble dealing with Delmar's death and seeking a distraction. I went to the wall and charged the embedded glowstones to illuminate the massive forging chamber. There were a number of workstations and anvils throughout the room. Benito asked weakly, "Who is going to tell Castile?" There was silence as we all looked around. Constantine finally voiced, "It will be me. His death was my fault." No one argued with him as we continued our search. Benito seemed mollified it wouldn't be him and asked, while clearing the dust off some short blades, "Are any of these runic weapons?" Scholar Fabian was searching with us. "Most likely, no. Clean off the dust, and there is a chance if they have no rust." I started searching with everyone else. It gave us something to distract us from Delmar's body. I noticed Flavius pick up Delmar's runic blade. It was an extremely valuable dungeon blade, but no one stopped him. Every blade and axe I checked was tarnished with rust under the jacket of dust. It felt like Delmar had given his life for no reason. There were hundreds of weapons in here. All were artistic works that needed to be cleaned and oiled, but nothing was free of tarnish. "Got one!" An excited Benito called from near the forges. We all rushed over to find Benito was cleaning something that looked closer to a sledgehammer than a weapon. The head of the sledgehammer had been cleaned off and looked like liquid mercury in the light of the glowstones. Scholar Fabian quickly assessed it. Definitely an artifice hammer, but I think it is designed for metalworking and not fighting. He handed it around, and I realized how heavy it was when it got to me. The head alone was probably over 5 pounds, and the shaft added to that weight again in rich black wood. Constantine said what I had been thinking. The Goliath can use that. He can then be of some help with the specters. We continued to search the room and started stacking the weapons in the center so we wouldn't go over them more than once. We made 4 stacks. One was daggers, one for short swords, one for long swords, and one for axes. The spears we found. We leaned against the wall. We were interrupted twice by wandering specters but eventually searched the entire room. Constantine was the most upset of all of us. I think he wanted to find something more substantial so Delmar's death would not be in vain. We found 3 runic daggers and a second smaller runic forge hammer among the bones of the fallen smiths, bringing the total to 4 more runic weapons added to the company and a sledgehammer from Maveth. We left the room and began the walk back to the wine vault. Constantine led us but did not drag his feet. When we reached the room, he marched right up to Castile and told her what happened. I went to Mavith, who was playing checkers with Remus. "Eric, how did your exploration go?" the Goliath asked when studying the board. "Delmar is dead," I said plainly, and Remus' red mop of hair looked up in surprise. "That is impossible," Remus muttered, as he stood and went to spread the gossip. I sat across from Mavith and passed him the large runic sledgehammer. "This is for you, Mavith. It is a runic weapon, not designed for fighting, but should be good enough to bash some specters." The Goliath took the hammer and caressed the thick black shaft and the silvery head. "It is an impressive hammer, Eric. It is an impressive hammer, Eric. How did Delmar meet his fate?" He leaned the sledgehammer against the table, focusing on me. I looked around the room as Remus spread the word. "We found a forge, an armory of sorts. We bashed down the door and the Wight attacked us in the confusion as dust blocked the light. There were another 11 specters in the room, and Delmar had to fight alone for a period while we dealt with the Wight. We didn't know he was fighting so many. He was overwhelmed before we could assist." Castile was pacing further in the wine vault as Constantine had finished telling her. The entire company also heard the news, and the mood was extremely heavy. Flavius was handing out the runic daggers, and the small hammer those who did not have a runic weapon yet. Everyone who had been sleeping was soon awake as we waited on Castile. I approached to see if I could help. Castile's face was hard as she walked back and forth between the wine racks. Constantine and Adrian stood nearby, waiting for Castile to vent. She continued to pace for minutes before finally looking up, her face hard. She located and asked Adrian, "Who is the best man to take over for Delmar?" Adrian swallowed hard. I assumed Delmar and Adrian were friends. They only ever really talked with each other. Adrian offered names: Lurkin, Linus, or Eric. Lurkin has been with us the longest. I was taken by surprise at the mention of my name. We all looked at Castile. Lurkin was the company cook, Linus was our medic, and I was the porter. Castile considered the advice and then looked at me. "Eric, do you want the job?" Adrian nodded at me, indicating I should accept it. "Yes, I will take over for Delmar." Castile pushed forward through her apparent grief. "Constantine, thank you for letting me know. Adrian and Eric, let us discuss what we will do now." Constantine still looked guilty but left us. I moved in close with Adrian. Castile announced. "We need to move out tomorrow," Adrian agreed. "The men are going to be reeling from Delmar's loss. If we are moving, they cannot dwell on it. We have been lucky only to lose 2 men so far. What about food and water? I knew the water canteens needed to be refilled from snow soon. We cannot live off of the wine alone. We should melt snow first." Adrian spoke. "Agreed. I will get teams to fill up some backpacks to melt snow tonight. Should take 3 trips to fill everyone's canteens." Castile's hand was shaking slightly as she voiced a question. Should we attempt to leave the city and confront the summoner or continue our search for the dungeon? This was obviously not the first time they had discussed this. Adrian gave his viewpoint. The snow is too deep to move effectively out of the city and beyond. We cannot surprise him, and he will have time to prepare for us. Even though I dislike dungeons, I think it is our best course of action to continue our search for it. They look to me as part of this exercise. Apparently I was supposed to offer an opinion and a reason for it. If we do make it into the dungeon, we may be trapping ourselves there. The exit may be congested with specters and wights. Adrian nodded in agreement. We could draw hundreds of specters to the dungeon entrance. What if only 6 of us can enter? The rest will be mobbed. Scholar Fabian had been edging closer and was close enough to overhear the conversation and approached us. "I do not think we will need to worry. The shimmering labyrinth has no limit on the number of adventurers that can enter." Castile looked displeased. "What have you found out? What have you not told me?" Scholar Fabian winced at her sharp accusation. "I don't know how accurate the information is. It is one of the children's books I found about the dungeon. It describes the first floor as a stone maze. Everyone who enters is randomly placed within the maze," Adrian said in disbelief. "I've never heard of a dungeon that separates the delvers. That is because I think it is a solo dungeon. You can meet up with others once inside and work together. The good news is that it appears there are many exits, and it is not difficult to leave the dungeon." The scholar offered the book in question to Castile. Castile opened the book, and Adrian looked over her right shoulder, so I looked over her left. There were some faded pictures, and the scholar described the book. It is a tale of an elven princess who wants to be an adventurer. She sneaks into the shimmering labyrinth to prove herself to her father. There could be a lot of embellishment. Castile voiced skeptically as she paged through the children's book delicately, careful not to degrade the ancient book further. She was interested in the pictures. Each picture was a faded watercolor and had the heroine fighting a different monster. I noted the monsters pictured. There were many spiders of varied sizes and colors, including a black bear and a massive white bear. The scholar took the book back. It is a child's tale, but there should be threads of truth in it. It is also the only book I have found that directly describes what to expect in the dungeon. Castile looked old, and her hair had streaks of gray in it. Do you still have the recipe book too? Yes, I also brought that one with me, Scholar Fabian affirmed. We will make our way to the hearth tree tomorrow, and try to find a way around it. Will the dungeon be above or below? Castile asked resignedly. The scholar didn't have a definitive answer, but with an hesitant look offered his best guess. I believe it is below ground. The Elven King tried to hide its existence from outsiders and seems to have been successful for the most part. Castile nodded, committed to continuing the search for the dungeon. Delmar was a great legionnaire. He knew exactly what each and every one of you needed, and how much you could carry. His knowledge and skill with the sword will be sorely missed. She scanned the group, locating Delmar's blade. Flavius. Delmar would have wanted Adrian to carry his blade. Flavius walked forward, and the two of them exchanged runic weapons. Flavius took the borrowed blade the Duchess had secured for the expedition. After the ceremonial exchange, Castile continued, we are close to the dungeon. In 8 hours, we will push together in search of it. We will be able to find food inside, and the summoner will not know where we went. Castile's speech was not as motivating as I thought it could be. She also did not tell the company that the dungeon might separate us when we entered. I was left to coordinate the snow retrieval teams with Adrian to fill everyone's canteens. I also had to ensure each man securely packed 6 bottles of wine in their packs. Being in charge of logistics meant I now had a lot less free time, and had to babysit the men who were too lazy to remain prepared. I also saw how much solid food we had left in Lurkin's pack. It was just enough food to feed everyone a single full meal. Lurkin planned to stretch it for 3 days, and then we would subsist entirely on wine afterward. As we left the wine vault, there were still thousands of bottles here if we needed to come back and replenish our supply. Too many of the men were dealing with daily cramps and muscle pains from slow starvation. I agreed entering the dungeon was our best course of action. We were too feeble to fight our way out of the city. I was in the middle of the group with Castile, who frequently went forward to capture a specter. I was glad I did not have to use the Kettle. We quickly moved through the underground network, Constantine leading us. When we reached the room where Delmar rested, Castile went in and covered his body in his sleeping roll. She said a few private words, and then offered the men a chance to take any weapons they wanted from the piles we had made during our previous visit. Even though they were not runic weapons, the quality was far superior to our Legion-issued gear. I picked through the daggers and hand axes. I added a dozen of each to my storage. No one was paying much attention to me, and I figured they could eventually be cleaned and sold. I also took one of the Elven spears. If we found another Wight, I would prefer to be able to hold it at range. The claw marks on my armor were a terrible reminder of the encounter. We quickly found the passages blocked by the hearth tree's gnarled roots when we headed out. The roots blocked the passage, and even went through the stone floor to the lower level and down to the sewers. Castile determined it would take too much energy and time to cut through the mess. We started making our way to the right, trying to follow the roots. We constantly had to backtrack and seek a wider route around. But we were making progress circumnavigating the tree. Things got a little dicey when we caused a rush of over 50 specters and poltergeists when we entered a wide corridor. We had to cycle men to the front, and Castile got extremely busy with the Kettle of Souls. Our large group even had to deal with specters coming from behind through the walls. During the rush, Mavith was a monster with his new runic sledgehammer, where it took multiple strikes from a runic sword to dissipate a specter. Mavith's heavy hammer blow always took them out in one. We proceeded even slower after that rush. Firth was the only legionnaire who was too injured to help in the fighting, his dominant sword arm broken and in a sling. Everyone was exhausted after hours of walking and fighting in the underground complex. The complex never seemed to end. It really appeared as if we were never going to get to the fabled dungeon. Scholar Fabian got Castile's attention. Mage Castile, this door goes up to the city. She gave him an impatient look to get to the point. The scholar wiped the coating of dust to read the Elven script. It goes to the Elven barracks that I know. I am not too certain, but this barracks, or maybe Delver Hall, was in charge of guarding the entrance to the dungeon. The entire company was suddenly silent. All eyes turned to Castile for direction on what we would do next.